Good morning, everybody. As you listen to this, are you looking to increase your mental toughness, build muscle, improve your endurance anytime, anywhere from any mobile device? I think we can all agree that nothing worthy is ever accomplished alone. So if you're looking to do those things, are you also looking for a community of nearly 10,000 like-minded athletes that are going to hold you accountable? A program that has thousands of hours of testing on dedicated mountain hunters, first responders, and military personnel, and you'll have lifetime access to any of the programs that you may purchase? Are you looking for an organization that has programs for everyone, those who hit the gym and heavy weights, and those who like to work out at home with no gear at all? Or a program for beginners, intermediate, and elite athletes? If it sounds like I'm talking to you, then you need to check out Mountain Tough Fitness Labs. Mountain Tough Fitness Lab believes eliminating psychological barriers is the key to reaching your goals. They're founded by an ex-SEAL, an ex-Army Ranger, and West Point instructor. They have fitness programs for when accomplishing the mission is all that matters in rugged terrain at high elevation for multiple days. My personal favorite portion of the Mountain Tough programming is that they focus on mental toughness. Everything they do is grounded in one purpose: life transformation. And like I mentioned earlier, they have over 10,000 athletes. So it's an incredibly strong community, which is very supportive, and it's going to help keep you accountable. I think we all know that the right nudge from the right person at the right time can change your destiny. And regardless of your age or circumstances, I am nudging you to start today, as I know the Mountain Tough programs and the Mountain Tough community will enable you to become the best version of yourself. Mountain Tough is offering the listeners 20% off. Go to mountaintough.com/clearedhot to receive 20% off. That is mtntough.com/clearedhot. This episode is also brought to you by the Wild Alaskan Company. If you like seafood, start paying attention. Now, speaking of seafood, when you defrost it, you know that the countdown for freshness has begun. And actually, who knows how long that fresh grocery store fish has been sitting out there. Wild Alaskan Company freezes their fish right after it's caught, so it's perfectly handled and delicious when you're ready to start cooking. Wild Alaskan Company delivers high-quality, sustainably sourced wild-caught seafood right to your door. Each shipment contains premium cuts of individually wrapped portions of delicious seafood that are ready to prepare and easy to cook. You can choose from salmon, cod, halibut, and more, or, of course, a combination. And every month, there are different specials to explore. Wild Alaskan Company seafood is how nature intended it to be. Always wild, never farmed or modified, and it contains no antibiotics. You can adjust, pause, or cancel your membership at any time, and they offer a 100% satisfaction guarantee or your money back. Right now, you can get $15 off your first box of premium seafood when you visit wildalaskancompany.com/clearedhot. That's Wild Alaskan, ALASKAN, company.com/clearedhot for $15 off your first box. wildalaskancompany.com/clearedhot. Make sure to use the URL to let them know that I sent you there. Last but not least, this episode is brought to you by Grammarly. Let's talk for a little bit about not sounding or looking like a dum-dum if you send emails or messages. If you want to save yourself doubt and time on emails, messages, and projects with real-time suggestions from Grammarly Premium, well, pay attention. My personal favorites are the clarity and vocabulary suggestions. Grammarly Premium helps you get your message across quickly without repeated or unnecessary words via those clarity suggestions. And you no longer have to search for synonyms because Grammarly Premium offers suggestions to replace overused words and phrases. That's the vocabulary suggestions I was talking about. Well, you may say to yourself, I'm not working on any projects, and that's okay. I'm not generally either. What I do is I use Grammarly Premium with every email that I send. There's also a free version of Grammarly, which is going to help you stay safe from embarrassing basic spelling, grammar, and punctuation mistakes. But if you want to level up, Grammarly Premium's advanced time-saving features help you write more clearly and efficiently. Streamline your workload with the seamless integration into Microsoft Office, your internet browser, your phone, and more. You can close all those thesaurus tabs and save the search time with vocabulary suggestions and get straight to the point with the clarity suggestions. Cut down on editing time and write more confidently with Grammarly Premium. Get 20% off Grammarly Premium by signing up at grammarly.com/clearedhot. That's 20% off at grammarly.com/clearedhot. And that's it on the business side of the house. Wasn't that painless? Let's talk about my guest today. His name is Greg Putnam, and he comes from the same community that I was raised in. That's right, the Naval Special Warfare, or U.S. Navy SEAL community. Greg spent 9 years on active duty, stationed in Hawaii at a command known as SDV, SEAL Delivery Vehicle. He talks about it and explains it, so I'm not going to really say much about it other than I run from SDVs when I see them because I'm afraid somebody will put me in them. And now that he's been out, let's say he dabbled a little bit. I'm going to call it in the tech side of the house when he first got out. But now he's back here in Montana working on a creation of his own, the Little Belt Cattle Company. That's right. Greg has become a first-generation operator of a cattle ranch in Montana. And you want to talk about something that sounds incredibly difficult? Holy shit. I don't know if it could get harder than that. So instead of me explaining it, let's let Greg talk about it. Episode 203 with Greg Putnam. Enjoy.
Okay, got the red smoke. Gun run, north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
I like it.
What the fuck do you want to talk about? Let's talk about how you met John Barklow.
Okay.
Was he the angriest man you had ever met in your life up to that point?
Not the angriest, but one of them. You know, he didn't have the avenue, I guess, of anger at the moment where we first met. Where like, or I guess he did have a lot of people that he could be angry at, but it was like
he's like the Hulk.
Yeah,
the Hulk's secret, like he says in I think it's the Avengers, or one of them is, I'm just always angry.
Yeah. Well, it was also, I was an SQT student, so you could tell if somebody was getting angry and you didn't want to be, you know, on the receiving end of some sort of post buds beating that. So if you could tell John was getting a little upset, you immediately, you know, tried to. But there was a few people that were able to piss him off during that trip.
Yes. Yeah, he has a level of anger that he's capable of that I'm deeply envious and appreciative of.
But then, like, we'll go shoot bows and stuff, and like, you know, he's zen. He's zen and he's calm and but yeah, we have some funny conversations about, especially working, you know, in different facets with different people that, you know, kind of aren't used to that, and just the whatever on how that can go.
Yeah. So you met him as an SQT student?
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
He was in Kodiak, teaching in Kodiak. We came through there, and he was doing all the, you know, outdoor winter warfare, survival.
The stuff he thrives at.
Yes.
When I first met him at Team 5, he was a diver, obviously. He was a diver throughout his whole career by trade. But, I mean, the first trip I ever did with him was rock climbing. You don't want to sleep on that guy. He's got skills in the backcountry, whether it's snow, like his rock knowledge, the rope knowledge, the survival system knowledge. Like he's a monster.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't recommend people sleep on him.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I remember, you know, just a super interesting guy, right? Like in that space, and we were in Kodiak in like actual winter. You know, I think we got up there in February, and we were there through like early March, like something like that. And yeah, I just remember, you know, when I first met him, just being, you know, from a kid who used to hunt and stuff, and just all his things that those guys were doing up there at the time, and they were doing some like big hunts, and guys were shooting some big stuff, and it was really interesting. And I
went through it such a different time so I've been to Kodiak, or went through the Kodiak facility twice, but it was not a structured pipeline. What buds class were you?
I was 279.
Okay, so you came through, I mean, well after me, not an incredible amount of time, but it had changed. Like I went through STT, so you guys went through SQT.
Correct.
Did you hit static line and then free fall first? And then into the rest of that SQT pipeline?
No, we did it. Our class had to be split between, it was actually kind of funny. You had SEER for half the class while the other half jumped.
Yep.
And then you had the flip, except for that was towards like the end of, that was actually the last. So the last thing I did right before SQT graduation was SEER. So you had half the class was in jump, the other half that was in SEER, and then graduation. So everybody coming out of SEER was like mortified and skinny and pale and just in horrible moods. And everybody had been jumping was all like, you know, just fired up, excited,
sunglass tan.
Yes, and just like telling everybody how cool they were, and everybody else had lost, you know, 15 pounds, and it was like, oh, here's graduation. And but it was actually at the Alaska was the first trip I did in SQT. You know, it was like maybe it wasn't that long after you graduated BUD/S. It was maybe like you had like that week, and then it was the next week that
you were
went,
off.
Yep, and we went right up there.
And to save people Google time, SEER is Survival, Escape, Resistance, and Evasion, also known as Camp Slappy.
Yes.
SQT is SEAL Qualification Training, where you get your trident at the end of it.
Correct.
And STT was what I went through, which was SEAL Tactical Training.
And then you didn't get your trident right until you went to the team, went through the full.
I went through a full. I was there about a year, and then it was an oral board with practical steps along the way. So they would take like the senior goat locker, 7s, 8s, and 9s, and they would fuck with you.
Yeah.
And it would be like, I think it was over the course of a few days, because you had a medical station, and it would be knowledge and then IV. I was going to say tourniquet, but that came actually later on. I still remember when I first got medical training, it was like use in case of extreme caution.
Yep.
No more than an hour. And then
Yep.
towards the end, it's like carried 9, put them on everything.
On everything that yeah. If it's bleeding, you tourniquet it.
Yeah, tourniquet
yes.
and deal with it later. But then, like the weapon station, fuck, there were these salty old Master Chiefs at Team 5. And there's like a 60, an M60 laying on the table, M4, SIG 226, and I want to say there was some other stuff. And it was full disassemble everything, put them back together, name every part, talk about the components, how they fit together, how it functions. You know, is this a open bolt weapon, fully automatic? We're talking FPS coming out of the barrel. Like, it was gnarly.
Sure.
And not everybody passed. And then I don't even know. Shit, I'm trying to remember how they told us we passed. Because they fucked with us.
Sure.
There had to have been like, yeah, we'll let you know.
Yeah.
See you
It
later.
wasn't like, hey, fantastic job.
Oh.
Here you go. You've earned it.
Let's
well
be honest.
done.
Has
Yeah.
there ever been that ever in the history of the SEAL teams? I don't care what you did. They're like, average, a little below.
Yeah.
Could have done better. Here's some points to make you better in your performance.
Exactly.
Yeah, you could have fucking won the Nobel Peace Prize. And they're like, you could have done better.
Yeah. You could have done it a little earlier. You could have done
Yeah.
it a little cleaner. Yes.
But I'm glad that they changed it, because when I got into the teams in the late 90s, I mean, Team 5, we only got the green chocolate chip camis. And then Team 3, just down the road before they moved all the buildings, got desert. And they were totally focused on desert. And I was like Kodiak, Southwest Asia, Korea. I think it was like Op Plan 1911 or something like that, some crazy invasion of Korea, which I don't want any part of, nor do I
Sure.
want anybody else to have any part of. Fuck that. But it was so disaggregate, and the type of training that we got. STT, we all went through the same, but then you go to the teams, and I would look at like through the fence. I'm like, God damn it, those are awesome camis.
Yeah. The desert was always the
Yeah,
cool
I'd be like,
cami.
I'll trade you guys some for these woodlands and just like pack rocks. I'm like, fuck. But so I guess to wind that up for people listening, it used to be individual team training, and then it switched to basically the group took it over. It oversees all the SEAL teams. And I think it's better that way, because then everybody gets that standard template going to the SEAL teams.
Yeah, and then when and I think everybody does it a little different. Like when I showed up to my team then, it was basically like, okay, you have a trident, but you're the least trained Navy SEALs on the
you're
face
swine.
of the earth. Exactly. And everybody had to put their, their bird in the little bird cage. And then,
Tell me about that. I didn't hear of this.
Yeah, so
you got issued your trident, and then they said take it off.
and then you would take it off. You'd put it in the bird cage. Now you would have to wear it to like official command events and things, but you were not to wear it, kind of around. You couldn't take the bird for a walk, if you will.
Really?
Yes, and there wasn't like a test that you took. It was almost like when you'd done enough stuff that people thought you were halfway decent, you would kind of just get it back. Like, hey, you can grab your bird back, and you're like, I did it. It's mine now.
Yeah.
Kind of. And not every platoon did it like that, but that was kind of how.
And so essentially what happened for me after STT is there was that probation period where they were kind of figuring you out. Then you took that oral board.
Yep.
So, yeah, trust me, we didn't even have a bird. We would just go to the exchange and look at them and be like, oh, it's so nice.
Yeah,
I want
yeah.
one of those. Yeah, but we did it sounds like they had you guys on probation much like they had for us, but it was just before.
Yeah, and there wasn't, like I said, like some like official, and there were some guys that were like terrible, and they would just longingly look at like the guys that crushed everything, like super talented guys, right? That like came in like day one, and all the older guys were like, be like that guy. Go ahead and get your trident back. And you're like, man, that didn't take long. And then there were some guys who were waiting for a while and had a hard time.
As they should.
Yeah,
I appreciate
completely.
that, actually.
No, completely. And yeah, no, and that actually kind of carried over at that command where, if you weren't at like a super high level of performance, they actually had pretty good consequences there as far as the guys that, because everybody thinks that everybody who goes through BUDS or makes it to a SEAL team is like this exceptional like athlete and human being.
100% not true.
Not true at all. And even like the really good people are just like pretty just average folks in general. But there's
you have any idea how much pushback I get when I say that? Like I consider myself to be incredibly average because of the peer group, but most of the guys be like, yeah, we're just, people are like, no way, dude, you can't say that. I'm like, I don't think you understand. It was a bunch of monkeys with automatic weapons.
Completely. And it was just a bunch of people who like really wanted to do that job, right? And just I don't know what
and oftentimes we're a train wreck in many other aspects of their life.
100%. And
to include myself, I'm also talking about myself.
I consider myself to be extremely untalented, kind of across the board. Like, wasn't a great athlete in high school. I'm 5'7", 165 pounds when I was like at my prime in the Navy. And you have all these people that think like every Navy SEAL is like 6'4", 250, and there are
Dolph Lundgren.
Yeah, there's some guys that are like like we had a guy in one of my platoons, like we called him the T-1000 because like that is what he looked. He would
they're specimens
completely, and that guy was like unbelievably talented at the things that he did. I don't put myself in that, but I could just I knew I wanted to do that job really badly, and I didn't want to just like, I want to make it through BUDS, or I want to like test myself in Hell Week. Like, I really wanted to be doing that job, and I think that all it is. It's a group, and it's how it is. I mean, it's like I can name every demographic from the like trailer parks to like the mansions, and everybody in between.
Yeah,
and the people that like filled that that pie. It just all came together for this, like, and as that class like got whittled down, you were just like, hey, these are all like good. It was all good people, but nothing special. There's no talent test, right? There's no like, you have the basic ASVAB, and then you go, hey, I either want to do it or I don't.
Yeah,
and that's what they figure out.
The curriculum works well.
It works amazingly well.
But like any curriculum, it's not perfect. There's weeds in every lawn. That's what I like to say.
Yeah, and you get some guys that like, I like to say like, you get a couple guys occasionally that there was just a few more people that were just worse than them that took a lot of focus, right? And they just never got to them because we like frankly ran out of time.
Yeah.
And some of those guys actually like came with me, unfortunately. I had this one guy that legitimately, he was my bunkmate in boot camp, and he was basically just poison ivy to me. Like wherever I went, he was right there, and he was in my BUDS class, and then he somehow got ordered. And I just, every time throughout my entire like beginning of my career, I just was like, I gotta get away from this guy, and I couldn't until like finally his performance was so bad that and this was a guy that had gone through all the training, and it was and how it is, like you see a guy with like the same dream that you had and like gets there, but then isn't doing it up to that level.
Yeah. And
it's a detriment to the other people there, and it's unfair to everybody else that you're relying on to like basically, your life is like the Big Lebowski said, your life is in their hands, and when you see somebody who consistently isn't like hitting those performance points, one thing I really appreciated about that command is they actually did something about it. And there was quite a few people that, kind of made it through BUDS that ultimately didn't have very long careers in the Navy.
I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. And it's hard, right? And
well, it's an investment on that individual's part, but also on the military's part. I mean, they are taking a chunk of their life to try to pursue that path, and the government is investing a lot of time, money, energy, and effort to refine them. Actually, I would say at that point, probably still select them. But if it doesn't work out, I've ran into one specific thing sticks out to me. I've run into quite a few students that I put through training, and specifically ones who didn't make it through. And sometimes maybe I was the last instructor for pool comp, which is not necessarily, actually, it's very more specifically, it's not me at all saying, hey, you're not good enough. You either met the criteria or didn't. I just happened to be the last face to say, hey, that was your fourth failure. Check in at the pool deck as a failure, and then I'll probably see you at the DRB afterwards with the training officer. But one very unique instance, I was actually sitting at the VA of all things when I was getting out and just going through all the paperwork drill. And a student came up to me. He's like, Instructor Stumpf, do you remember me? And I was like, first off, no. Second off, please don't call me that.
Sure.
I'm getting out of the military. My name is Andy. And he's like, I hated you for a couple of years because you failed me at pool comp. And I thought in the moment that I was good enough to pass. And I realized you probably saved my life because I completely wasn't ready to go into that community.
Yep.
And he was going to like medical school. So he had just like, okay, that's not going to work. I'm going to lateral. And he'll probably go and do amazing things. I don't know if everybody arrives there because I think a lot of the guys who end up getting removed, first off, it gets a little ugly towards the end sometimes too because there's oftentimes, you've seen this, I'm sure, personality issues and performance issues. And when those are combined, it can be very difficult to separate. And you have to document, and I know this because I was on the other side of the table a few times when we took tridents away. It's actually really a gnarly process.
Oh, yeah.
There's no like, hey, he's not a nice guy. There's none of that shit.
Yeah.
It's documented.
I mean, that might fall on the other side of the coin. If somebody says, hey, he's a really nice guy, that might go in the negative category.
But at the end, when you pull that trident, most of the guys are like, fuck you.
Oh, yeah.
Fuck you and fuck this community. I didn't want to be a part of it anyway. And they don't realize I understand how, because I can put myself into their shoes and imagine how horrendous that would be. But if you put somebody else into a fucking box or yourself ended up in that, I mean, like, what's worse?
Yep.
Like, those lines have to be held. And it was tough when I was the operations officer for TradeEd on the West Coast.
Yep.
Being involved in those DRBs or performance review boards or trident review boards and actually like, hey, man, you're going to pop that thing off right now and you're going to slide it across the table. It's gnarly.
Yep.
But
it's heavy. But
you have to do it.
It's for the betterment of everybody, and it also is like the betterment of the standard.
And the person you're removing the trident from,
That's
too.
what I was going to say. I'm sure it takes a very long time, and I bet some people never get there to where they actually realize that they were. I mean, personally, I think it'd be far worse if you hurt somebody else.
For sure.
But those people, the reason that most of them ended up leaving was because they themselves were at high risk of being, hurt or killed. And I'm sure you saw it with training more than anything, right? Like those people had the same dreams that you and I did, but sometimes
they just couldn't do it.
They couldn't do it. And that is one thing I love though about that community where that standard, was always to the best of people's ability upheld and expected. And, there was no kind of, you were always kind of like working on your reputation, right? And I'm sure you and I can tell you, I know for a fact I had things that, I tried to do that didn't work out, or I had things where I'm like, everybody has it, but that is the greatest thing about, in my opinion, like buds in particular, is that you have all these, the only day you win at buds is like the last day.
The day you leave.
Exactly. Like even the moment where you're like, oh, you kind of win, like you're still losing, right?
Yeah.
And it just teaches you though that, and it's a great life lesson. And I like try to tell my kids this all the time, it doesn't matter like what the setback was. It just matters like how you managed it, right? And how you handled it. And what did you do when nothing continued to go your way? Because it's not one thing usually at buds, right? It's like the culmination of time building, and like the ruck gets heavier and heavier as the rocks get put in there. And it's not, I think people become overwhelmed by the circumstance at like the final moment, right? It's kind of like the fuck it moment. Like, but that doesn't happen right away. That happens over a duration of time. And the people who stick around are they're somehow mentally able to just go like, that wasn't so bad. Or, you're laughing at your buddies there's nothing better than watching one of your buddies at buds get punished.
It's the best.
It's the greatest.
Even in the SEAL teams, watching somebody get so incredibly hurt, not like catastrophic or hospital, but falling off of a ladder and getting your legs tangled in it. I'm combat ineffective for 5 minutes. I'm fucking dying laughing.
It's the greatest. And especially with the certain personalities and certain people. I was telling somebody this story. So when I left, so when I got out of SQT, I went to STV Team 1 in Hawaii.
Okay.
And so I spent 5 years there. And like Trevor and I were there at the same time, and a bunch of just like amazing human beings happened to be at that command at that time. But there was a particular guy, he was just one of those guys that, number one, he like thought he knew everything, thought his performance was better than anybody. It wasn't. But he was a great person. Like to watch him, be uncomfortable was maybe one of the greatest things. So we were doing this dive in the SDV, which I think you've had other folks on. I mean, I could explain what it is.
It's a mini submarine. SDV
Exactly.
is SEAL delivery vehicle, and that is the limit of my knowledge.
Yep. And so it's a wet submersible. You're literally like, you know, for people who aren't familiar with submersibles, which I wish I wasn't, it fills with water, and then you're literally breathing on like a scuba apparatus. It's cold, dark, and you sit there by yourself with your own thoughts for long duration. And so and I could go further into these stories because there's a couple of funny ones, but this one particular time, you know, you'd always judge how long these dives were going to be, and you'd have a rough idea based on the brief, but the pilot was a huge component to actually hitting those time frames. So we thought we had the best pilot coming to pick us up. Turns out we didn't. We had the worst. And so this guy who I'd been in the woods with for like, I don't know, 3 days, and he was like one of those guys that he would tell a lot of stories, and they were all terrible. And they all, so like, you know, 3 days at like SR Hyde with this guy, and you're like, I got to get away from this guy. So anyway,
are there any live rounds around
is
here?
There
I need one.
Yeah, exactly. So he goes, and we're all, you know, and it's funny because when you do these like cold water dives and stuff, you have like a team of people like helping you get ready, and then you leave and do it. And then when you're getting back into your wetsuits and things, like nobody's helping each other. Everybody's over it. So
yeah, but imagine you guys are just caching that stuff as you go over
you're
the
carrying
beach.
it with you.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
And it's heavy. I mean, they're big, thick dry suits. Like they weigh, you know, your rucks were huge. And, you know, but like nobody's helping you with like the wrist seals or anything. So if you don't get those things perfect, they leak. And once you're in that thing, like whatever you have on is what you have. You can't just say,
what you start the game with is what you're going to end the game with.
And like I used to say, like you'd get like a trickle of water down in the back of your neck, and you'd be like, oh no, especially early in the dive because there was nothing to do about it. And so this guy made this big deal how, you know, oh, it's only going to be, you know, whatever, 2 hours out. You know, I'm just going to throw on some, you know, long underwear and put this thing. And I remember we were like kind of late. So in a hurry, he goes to like pull his dry suit up. And I remember I saw his long underwear like kind of pull up like out from being untucked. And I was like, oh man, that's going to be pretty rough. And so he's sitting.
Of course, you pointed this out to him, right?
Of course not. No. So I saw this and I was like, as I was putting on every piece of puff gear I had, you know, because I knew the pilot picking us up. So I was like, this could go. There's no risk here. Like I'm going full warmies. Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, I'd rather be sweating than even the chance of being cold. And so in these things, you basically sit like on your buddy's lap. And so there's like 2 guys in the back and then 2 guys sitting on their laps. And then the door would be in front of so the back guy doesn't have access to the door. And the only way that you basically have to communicate, which this is great and like the greatest military in the world, right, is you occasionally squeeze your buddy to make sure that
he's alive.
They're alive, yes. But the goal is to sit, especially as like a new guy, like you sit and you do not move a muscle. It doesn't matter, like, because nobody wants anybody bumping into them, you know, and so you just sit there quietly. And
you're talking for hours.
For hours. So we figured this was going to be like 2. So this guy's sitting behind me, and we're only in there for maybe like 20 minutes, and I'm sitting on his lap, and I feel like this like quiver. And I was like, oh, he's getting cold. Well, Andy, I'm not joking. This goes on. By like hour 4, this guy was going into full convulsions with audible underwater, like, woo! He would shake for like 15, 20 seconds and then nothing. And I was like, oh my, like maybe that's it. And I'd squeeze him and he'd squeeze. And I am laughing so unbelievably hard that like I'm a little concerned I might get like a dive injury because I mean, I have a hookah in my mouth and I cannot stop laughing. I'm laughing just and this is happening. It's the only entertainment I have. And I'm just sitting there waiting for this.
Is the dude up front, like I'm assuming the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line?
Yeah.
Is he just up there just like serpentine?
It's like, and you know how it is. It's
what
like,
is he doing up
just
there?
Imagine, like there was guys who were they were bad navigators, and it's just like diving, right? Like you'd have a guy who could like just nail it, and then you'd have another guy. I don't know. This guy ran into somebody like banked the boat up on a sandbar, but in the back, like you don't get out no matter what. Like you're just back there. And so I remember we finally get to the pier. It's like 7 hours later, and we all get out, and I'm dying. I can't wait to tell people like the pain that this poor guy endured. he's in the back still. The boat's strained out. I'm not joking. He's in the fetal position, just stuck. Like he cannot physically get himself out of the boat. 3 guys had to come get him out of the boat, put him in the van. They had to put him in like a sleeping bag, and I never forget when he came out of there. Still the because he was okay. It wasn't like he wasn't like hurt, but he suffered dearly, and he was a person that just his suffering was so joyful. And when I told everybody else like what was going on, everybody else was like, I wish I had been in there. And nobody says that. Like nobody wants to be in there.
Fuck yes.
Yeah. It was a funny place because again, you're just stuck in there with your own self.
I've only talked with Trevor briefly about the SDVs. I've only seen one in person once, and I went the other direction because I was terrified.
Sure.
They would say, hey, do you want to go for a ride?
Sure.
And the answer is no.
No, it's absolutely no.
So I don't know how some of the dive profiles, just the duration that he told me, I'm like, you're out of your fucking mind.
They're crazy. Yeah, and he was a pilot, so in some of those dives, you have to maintain certain very, very specific profiles or everybody can get hurt badly. And Trevor was up at my house a couple weeks ago, and we were just laughing. I was saying there's a reason that a lot of people, and SCV is a funny place because and I'm sure when you were in it probably didn't have like a great reputation as far as like the operators were concerned.
When I was a BUDS instructor, mind you, I know nothing about SDVs.
Sure.
I would say to the students, if you're given a choice between being assigned to an SDV team or suicide, you should kill yourself.
Yeah, and that's good advice. It's very good advice. And if they made that if they made like a legitimate, like let's just call it like 3 days at SDV team 1, a BUDS evolution, the level of quitters. I have good friends who are Navy SEALs, and like these are like hard dudes, like combat hard.
They would break them.
They were like, I would never ever. They're like, I wouldn't do it. And I'm like, well. And I actually wasn't even supposed to go. I mean, there's crazy people who asked to go there. I was not one of those people. I was supposed to stay in San Diego, and then we had a bunch of guys. It happened to be everybody that was volunteering for SDV somehow didn't make it through like the last 3 weeks of SQT.
Oh, no.
And they sent this guy out. I'll never forget. They were like, this is the greatest command on the face of the earth. Like women will flock to you. Your penis will get bigger by 7 inches.
Every dive.
The tourists in Hawaii, the women are beautiful and they love nothing. This is the greatest command on the face of the earth. Who's coming with us? There was like 40 guys in that room, not a single hand.
They're all doing this number.
Yeah, everybody's looking around like, I hope if I don't make eye contact, maybe they won't see me, And so they had like this random selection.
Oh no.
Yes, and I remember, and I still to this day, I'm like, I still do believe it was a random selection just because of the people selected. Like there was no rhyme or reason. I couldn't tell you how.
I truly believe it is random. So in third phase, when I went through, in second phase, we filled out our dream sheets, which is a laughable term.
Yes.
And I know that based off the results that came out of it. And I was from Santa Cruz. So I was like, let's just go check out the East Coast. 2, 4, and 8. Put down 2, 4, and 8. Got team 5. I literally think they throw darts or they just filter the names into a program and it just strips them off and it just goes down.
Yeah. Because there was it's not like, oh, these were exceptional people that somehow would do better here. It was, but anyway.
It was match heartbeat with slot.
Exactly. It was just like, but nobody wanted, I mean, there was a guy in my class that he literally offered $10,000. I'm not joking, for somebody to take his spot. It was 100% serious and nobody would take it. And
wow.
So like the best way that I could explain. So Trevor was over the other day. We were just laughing. We were saying like, there was a time though where, just kind of in the community, but people didn't really realize how challenging, just environment, like a normal week there.
Yeah.
I would say like other than jumping, those dives were, it's like live fire every day, right? But it's almost like being deployed live fire every day because if you have an issue like in the air or underwater,
it's gonna be serious.
It doesn't matter if it's training, right? Like you could call it training, but the consequences are the same as if basically, somebody's shooting at you.
Well, you guys would have somebody die on a training evolution there every couple of years, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, Mother Nature's a bitch. And underwater is unforgiving.
It's terribly unforgiving. And it was, Yeah, and that was like, honestly, like, you know, you would just go back to work though the next day, right?
Yeah.
And we could go way like we could spend our whole time talking about all the funny things about it. But like, it's almost one of those things, like statistically, like you probably will end up getting a dive injury there, which I did at some point, which was the whole thing. But I remember I was talking to Trevor and I was like, yeah, there's a reason that, like, you know, number one, I think the reputation of the folks coming out of there, because we actually started having like all these new guys that wanted to go there, and they were really, really good. Like super, super good guys. And there was a lot of good people there when I was there. But as I went through, like, they actually changed like the whole training curriculum. They brought all these guys from all the different coasts and every team into the training command there.
Yeah.
Which they didn't actually have a training command when I first showed up. It was like, if you didn't do a great job and you couldn't be in a platoon, you went to training. And so like the training was very, very low quality at that time. But they revamped the entire thing, and they had some awesome people, but not just great people, but you had this like kind of like mind molding of all the coast kind of coming together. And so I felt like, actually, I wouldn't change the experience, but I actually got like a fantastic foundation as a new guy at that command, only because the people that were running the training at the time were like, honestly, were some unbelievable, like, awesome SEALs. And that kind of continued as I was there. Like, you started getting more people coming from other places. And, but, you know, I was saying to Trevor, I was like, yeah, there's a reason that, like, there's a lot of maniacs that come out of there. Like, I mean, maniacs in like the nicest way, but,
yeah,
you know, like, you're stuck with yourself a couple times a week in the dark, just in your own head. There's no music, there's no phone, there's no talking. There's just you with your thoughts.
And the sound of inhale and exhale.
Exhale, yes. And you just like, so like somebody asked me like, oh, like, what's that like? And I was like, this is the best way I can explain it.
People can go experience this on their own too. You need a bathtub and a snorkel and a stopwatch.
Some ice, and turn off all the lights and sit in there.
And dedicate 6 hours of your day.
Yeah, like drive from like basically like do the drive that I did today, but do it underwater, and just no, you know, and that's a couple times a week. That's not like, oh, we do this like once a month.
Yeah.
That was like, you know, if you were on the roster and you were healthy and in a platoon, like, you were diving a lot. And that was the other great thing, though. The attitudes of people in those commands were at that command was so great. Because if you went to do like CQC, so, you know, close quarters combat training, people were so happy to be like, you could have them do anything and they wouldn't care.
Yeah.
They'd be like, I'm so thrilled to be here doing this.
I'm so thrilled to be here not diving.
Exactly. Like, it didn't matter what it was. And like, if you went and jumped in with like another team or something, the comment often was like, man, you guys all have like pretty good attitudes. It's like, yes, because I'm not, you know, being subjected to the STV at the moment. And so I was like saying to somebody, I was like, yeah, so I was, you know, this is an STV dive according to me. I was in the van, I was driving over there, and have you ever heard that Adele song, like Someone Like You?
Yes.
Okay. So that song was on the radio, right? And it was like the last song I kind of heard before and I used to get a little grumpy right before, because I knew kind of, this is my, you know, no, this is like probably late in my first platoon. You know, but all the guys diving would like, you know, then once you got in the water, it was fine. But anyway, I'm in the van, I hear that song, and I'm like, it's kind of stuck in my head. I'm like, oh, it's like kind of nice. So I get in the boat, we start going, we're underwater, and I'm playing that song kind of in my head. And I'm like, man, what a nice song. Like, this is a really beautiful song. Like, you know, and then I start thinking like, I bet there's some gals out there that are probably thinking that about me, you know? And then like the whole cycle of like depression begins. So I'm thinking like, yeah, this is pretty good, you know? And then I'm like, this is a really nice song. Nobody would ever say this about me. There's not a woman out there that would think someone like you. So that went on for a little while, and I'm starting to feel pretty bad about myself. And then it went to, I owe a lot of people apologies. When I get out of here, I'm going to write, you know, every girlfriend from junior high to like my wife an apology, because I am such a piece of shit. Nobody would ever sing a song like this or write a song like this. And like, then you would get out of the boat, and like your buddies would be there, like pizza and stuff, and you would just be so grumpy. And they'd be like, what is your problem? You're like, and everybody knew, like, you just stopped asking that.
Yeah.
But that was like the duration of all those dives. Like, it started out like kind of mentally okay, and by the end,
you just broke yourself.
You just break yourself. And you know, I like now I have a hard time obviously shutting up, because I hate sitting for long periods alone because I did it for so long.
Fuck.
Yeah, it was a legit. And again, like I said, it was an awesome experience. Like the operations I got to do out of that command was amazing. It ended up being like, it was a very, very hard experience. Just like the environment and things, but it was also like, if you were good there though, it just meant you could like maintain systems. So then if you went to like, so you could see your other commands and things, like you just became like obsessed, because if you drop the, piece of kit or tool or something, and that was like the only one and you're underwater, like you're done. The whole thing's off. And, but we got to do some really neat things, over there, but it was but you're right. Like people died in training and, and it was just a hard,
it's a hard way to make a living.
It is.
What, where are you from originally?
I grew up in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Yep.
What led you towards the military? Did you come from a military family?
Sort of. Not like directly. My uncle had been a SEAL, and I remember when I was a kid.
So probably Nam era?
Yeah, he was like late Nam, like late, kind of late 70s era. Mm-hmm. And I remember I was just about to graduate high school, and he took me to his, like, it must have been like 20-year reunion down in VB. And I was like, like 110 pounds. And I was just about to graduate high school. I wasn't like exactly sure what I was going to do. And I remember he takes me to this thing, and like, we go to this whole deal where they, there's guys jumping out of planes and sniper shooting.
Oh, it's basically one of those 4th of July demos.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It was like the reunion demo. So they've got all the old guys back there. He's with all his buddies, but then there's a bunch of active duty guys there. And I remember at the time being like, oh, this is pretty legit. And I'd always like played Frogman and stuff as a kid just because, him, but that was where like the seed really got planted pretty deep. And then I ended up going to college, and like kind of through that experience was, kind of debating at the time, like, oh, okay, like, maybe this isn't the right, like college wasn't kind of the right thing. But my folks and I kind of, they were like, listen, you're almost done, just like, which was good advice. Yep. And then when I got done doing that, it was just something that kind of like never went away. And I just really wanted to, do that. And then obviously, like, during that time you had like September 11th going, and then you had, a lot of friends and things that were there. It was a good time in America to be in the military and feel like, at least on that front end where, there was a lot of things happening, and you kind of knew what you were asking for, which I think was a lot different, than certain other times. So I think that attracted like a certain type of person, and really, you could take, like I had buddies that, were in the military like before I was, and you just had a lot of guys that were already doing it, and it was just something that, but that was kind of the deep seed that got planted for me, was going to that first thing when I was
So if you did college, you probably went through buds at what, 23, 24?
No, I was a little older than that. So I started doing like outdoor guiding stuff when I was in college. And so I had worked in Alaska for a little bit, and then my cousin went to school in Missoula. So I used to come out, and I always had kind of a place to stay. So I'd guided up there a little bit.
Talking about hunting guiding?
No, I was doing more fly fishing stuff, because I would do it in the summers. And so I was doing like some fishing stuff, and then I would come out. So I started coming out to Missoula, and I was just guiding in stuff over the summers. Then I went back to school, and then when I got done, I really liked doing it. It was a good gig, and so I had some good opportunities and some things I wanted to do in that. So I went and started doing that, so I did that for like a few years. So I was actually like 26 when I started Buds.
I think that might be a little bit better, actually. You got some more laps around the sun. You got a little bit more context, a little bit more life experience.
Yeah, I had a lot of things not go your way, right? And you gave up a lot to. Yeah. Not that everybody doesn't give up a lot, but
and you can still recover.
Yeah.
You start creeping into your 30s, and I think there's definitely a tipping point where the odds are going to go against you, just from a physical perspective.
I think that like 23 to 24 is probably like that like sweet spot. I was probably a little bit on the north end of that, but I think the guys that were a little bit older probably fared better through like the mental side of it, which obviously is like the far heavier side. And it might hurt a little bit more, but it's going to hurt anyway, right? And but I did feel like, you know, again, like, you know, my wife, you know, we were together at the time. I had convinced her to move to Montana to do this like whole fishing thing. And then I was like, hey, you know, and
about that.
Yeah, about that. And it was going like really well, right? Like it was going awesome. And I was I was working for all these places. And that was something I'd like always really wanted to do. And it took a lot to get that kind of up and running. And so we had lived here for a while when we were doing that. And then, yeah, so then I started convincing her like, yeah, we should go, you know, so I remember like thinking to myself, like, there's no way I can quit because I can't go home and like that would have been right there at the end of the relationship, in my opinion. And there was a lot of things that, which was good though, because it took out any option that I had to there. It just wasn't even an option for me.
How many people started with your class?
You know, it's funny. I don't remember the exact number because they had just started this deal. So you went through boot camp and then you went through this like Buds prep deal.
Which I believe they've gotten rid of. Or they moved it to San Diego.
I think they did. It was fine. You know, it was all right. I wanted out of there as soon as possible. I wanted to get to Buds and like get after it and get started.
Yep.
So I only was in there. I think the minimum time you had to go through it was 3 weeks. And I think we were like on a plane to 4 weeks. But then there were some people that, you know, in my opinion, kind of were like abusing it. None of them, I don't think, were successful in their pursuit. But they'd be like, oh, I need more training here. I need to get, you know, they're basically like trying to prepare themselves where they should have probably been prepared. So we probably started with like 275-ish folks would be my guess. But then they only took, I want to say they were taking maybe around like 200 into the class. And then some people got weeded out. There was actually a really great Master Chief that ran that program in the beginning. And this guy was like, he walked in and you were like, that's a Navy SEAL right there. And he, you know, like he was like this like super accomplished. I mean, I'm not joking. You'd be in the pool, like practicing your knots and stuff. And all of a sudden you'd look over and here this guy would be in full camis in the pool just next to you. And you're like, where'd he come from? You know, and he set a great example. And I mean, he would, you know, he was probably in his 40s, like late 40s probably at the time, but he would just crush people on PT. And so they weeded guys out there. And then I probably showed up to San Diego at somewhere around, I don't know exactly how many guys they usually start with, but
I think about 200.
Yeah, that's what I think it was. Yeah. It was about 200. And then, you know,
what'd you whittle down to?
We whittled down to like, again, I think we were like somewhere in like the 50s. I don't remember exactly. I think it was like 56 or something. Yeah. From that, I got hurt. I started with 278, ended in 279. And so there was only like, I think there was like 12 original guys from that class, and then kind of the rest of the people.
How'd you hurt yourself?
I dislocated my shoulder doing those silly like buddy carries where you like wrapped your arms around like your buddy and then he like bear crawled and like my shoulder was already hurt. Yeah. And then I was like trying to hold on.
So you're saying basically one person's laying on their back in the sand and they get a grip around their buddy's neck?
Correct.
Who's bear crawling?
Correct. And
yeah, I'm familiar with that exercise.
Yeah, it's a good exercise, you know. But yeah, so I did that, and luckily I like bounced back right away to like the next class, and then made it through that, you know, from there. But yeah, it was, you know, it was still. The funny thing is with, which you probably know, and actually being an instructor was something I always thought would be interesting, just because I mean, I like when I got hurt, I got to like work a Hell Week, and it's like you get to see it from like this totally different perspective, because when you're in it, it's obviously, you know, very different. I imagine there was like a lot of, I don't know, it seems like a job where it was probably rewarding. I don't know. Did you like doing that, or was it?
It was, in retrospect, the most rewarding tour of duty that I had.
Interesting.
Not only was it cool to go back and make sense of the curriculum that didn't make sense when you were going through, because it's all consuming.
Yep.
And I think that experience of starting the first day and finishing, and it's like all you know is the next day on the schedule, and you don't even necessarily know what you're going to do on that day. Like that, the fear of the unknown is a real thing. Like if they just would have listed out, you're going to do this, 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 and this, people are like, okay. But there's nothing worse than starting a run with an instructor and they just say, we'll be done when we're done.
Oh, yeah.
Keep up.
Oh, yeah.
And as the instructor, you know exactly how far you need to go, and you set whatever pace you want to, and you watch people mentally break because they don't know. So going back and seeing the curriculum work and understanding. I went there after having been a SEAL for 10 years, so I had at least a Rolodex of experience that I could look at it and be like, oh, this is why we do that. This is where this comes from. Like pool comp is a great example. I was a second phase instructor, and for people listening not familiar with the pool, it's actually the last evolution of an entire week. And if you looked at only that evolution, I would say it would be impossible to pass. If you just threw people in the water and didn't teach them, they'd fail every time. So you don't actually do that. You start with, I think it's day, ditch, and dawn.
Yeah.
So daytime, you by yourself, take your gear off, put it back on. And then night, ditch, and dawn. And then day gear exchange, night gear exchange, that's with a buddy where two people go in with one set of gear, you transfer it back and forth. Then they do a little bit of the training, introducing malfunctions, for lack of a better term. But this whole time, you're briefing people procedure. Then you get to pool comp, which is a shit show by design, and it has nothing to do with diving, but it occurs underwater. I forget how deep the CTT is, the combat training tank, and they're building a new one right now anyway.
Yeah, I think it's like, you're not
12 feet maybe?
Yeah, so I was going to say 10, 12 feet.
Yeah, and you're crawling around, and it's supposed to last about 20 minutes, and it's a 1-to-1 instructor ratio, and you're sitting there introducing problems into the student's equipment. All but one of them is supposed to be solvable, but you have to follow the procedure regardless of how freaked out you are. And there are ways as an instructor to amp it up, because when you exhale, I see the bubbles come out. And if I want to time it and amp it up, oh, the bubbles are coming out. Give me that mouthpiece. Guess what, sucker? Like, I know you're on it. I know you're on an exhale.
Yes.
So you can, and you would do that, but you could put in a simple problem, or you could just rip it out of the mouth and turn their air off, and then. So I still remember the breathe. It all starts with, is your mouthpiece in your mouth or out of your mouth? That starts the whole sequence. And if they mess up, even in that, they get pulled out and they fail. And I had to talk with the students, or I made a point of talking with the students after they graduated pool comp, like, please do not go out and rent diving equipment.
Yes.
Because you don't fucking know how to dive.
Yes.
We were just testing you on your ability to follow procedures in an incredibly controlled environment that was super stressful for you.
Yep.
There's a dive medical
but
officer.
But that's CQC too, right? Like
it's the whole thing.
It's all these, like, can you keep the system in your head of like the correct procedure? And that's the same thing when you see that be applied, though, is like when you're actually doing that job for real, and there is systems that still have to be followed no matter like what level of stress gets like placed on you. But like you still, right, if you're like a team leader, you still have to keep track of like where your people are, but you also have to communicate to other people, kind of what you need. And that has to be done in a kind of sequential order that makes sense to people that like aren't there. So if you can't follow these kind of basic, but it's all like learned, right? Like you said, like the stress gets added as you go. But I can't remember, like, cause like, on like those ones, they had those tubes with the inhale and exhale.
Oh yeah.
And you had the drip. That was like
the goddamn. Is it like, I think it's an Aqualung regulator.
It's something like that, but it's like the dragger has that. So they're like, oh, this is what you need to have. But I remember like in pool comp, the instructor would pull your deal out, and those tubes would fill with water. You'd be on an exhale, and all you wanted to do was breathe, and you'd have to drink that. We were calling it like the
urine,
like the Dregertini, and you're like, you'd have to like take like 3 or 4 big gulps of water underwater, mind you, while all you want to do is breathe, and like every like alarm system in your brain is like, get out of here, and you'd have to drink this pool water cocktail out of the tube.
It's just urine.
It's just urine, pretty much at that point. And then you'd get some air, and then it would go through the process. But and how it is, like, and even the more you did it, like if you didn't pass it on your first try, the second time you did like a little better, right? And I'd say, and you probably know way better. Like I bet most guys pass on their third try.
That's when I passed. I failed the first 2 attempts at it.
My first attempt was like, I think I made it less than a minute, and literally like procedures all went out the window. And I think they do the first one, and if I remember correctly, like on Friday, and then you have the weekend.
2 attempts Thursday, 2 attempts Friday is how it was when I was there.
Okay, so that, but I remember like I failed the first one. And maybe it just had gotten late or something, but I had a night at home before I went into my second one. So I almost had like a night
You'll
off.
get a maximum of 2 attempts in one day.
Yeah, so I remember my first day, I only had 1 attempt, and I failed miserably. And then I went home that night and like literally just like drilled those procedures like over and over and over in my brain.
Yep.
And then the next time I went like 18 minutes, and I can't remember what whatever, it's been a while. But then like the next one, I was like, oh, I got this, you know, because you incrementally get kind of, and it just shows you like that stress inoculation does work from like a training perspective. And then, and that stuff, I mean, they tell you like you will be stressed out more than this in this job, right?
Which is true.
It is totally true. And it's just like you will be colder than you were in Hell Week. And when they tell you that in Hell Week, you're like, no way. And then you are, and you're like, okay, there's a reason for all of that. And then you're glad that everybody else is doing it and performing to that level as well, because that is what really sets the side where you're like if you and I met each other for the first time and, you know, there's at least some sort of like foundation of like,
correct,
this guy's been through this, even if, and that carries over. You jump off a helicopter somewhere and you're like, oh, there's another frogman. You're like, okay, like me and this guy, we might not get along. There's plenty of people like you probably didn't get along with that work, but you like working with them, or you knew
it's a known quantity.
Yep,
to a degree,
completely.
You have you have an origin that is the same between, and I think that's one of the things that allows the SEAL community to be successful.
Yep.
Everybody at least knows the baseline that you're starting from.
Yep, and everybody, like when you're sitting around and there's nothing else to do, and you've been together for a while, like you can tell a funny Hell Week story about your buddy who, you know, did something stupid, and everybody laughs, and even if they don't know the guy. And it's like it's a bonding thing. But that system, in my opinion, because if it didn't work, I think you would see these like huge fluctuations of numbers going up, especially as people, and again, I'm not in, and neither are you, but like I hear from people like, oh, like, you know, the standards aren't changing, but the way the standards are being tested have changed a little bit, but you're still seeing
same attrition
rate.
Yeah.
Which means that
it works.
It works. The system works. And like, when you're running around the boat on your head and you think your like neck, back, knees are going to break, you'll decide pretty quickly if you want to be there or not. You know?
Yes, you will.
Because I mentioned you get a lot of people like through this that reach out to you, like, you know, that are either interested in that or
a large volume. And a lot of them will ask, you know, what can I do to prepare? And some of them will even ask, and I've had parents ask me this like in person, hey, our kid wants to be a SEAL. Do you think they can make it? And the only honest answer, and I give this to them every time, is I have no idea.
Yep.
I really, it was amazing. If I had put money, going back as an instructor, if we had done a betting pool and said, I'll put $5 on this guy making it and $5 on this guy not, I'd be broke.
Totally. And I have people do that, you know, because you'll have, you know, whatever, especially if you live in like smaller communities or whatever. And somebody will reach out, hey, my kid wants to do it. But it's funny, the parents always generally ask that.
Yeah.
I've never actually been asked directly from like somebody considering it.
I have.
Do you think I'll make it?
And I think your only option is to be honest.
Completely.
I'll say, hey, listen, the odds aren't in your favor.
Yep.
Just like they weren't in my favor. I don't know what goes on between your ears. I can tell you that what my experience was, I went in without a plan B, which in hindsight may have been a shitty idea, but also maybe it was a great idea.
I think it was.
Yeah. So I give them the, I don't know, buddy.
Yeah.
That's
See,
all
and
I
I tell
do.
people this, and I'm honestly a firm believer in this. It's 50-50. You're either going to do it or you're not. And there's some things that can not go your way, like anything. There's like an element of like timing and luck. Like you fall off the top of the, you know, slide for life and break your leg. Like
seen it happen.
Yep. And it's like, bummer, right? But when it comes down to your decision to being there, it truly is your decision. You have to, like anything in life, right? Like there's a risk you take that like the reward is the success you find by doing it well. And that's true in this. And I've had people where I've legitimately said to them, I would never tell you like to do it or not to do it. I'm like, I can sometimes meet people and I'm like, this person's, in my opinion, I'm like, I think they've got a pretty good chance. I've recommended to other people, you know, you should really make sure that this is, because like the day you leave, you're still in the Navy, and you better want to be in the Navy first, and you better have, you know, something that you're going to be happy about doing. And I mean, I had one kid who was, I mean, it was actually, I mean, it was funny because he was a really, really smart kid, like really smart. And I was like, are you sure? Like he had a lot of stuff. And I was like, are you sure this is what you want to do? And he's like, yeah. And I met his dad. And I remember like his dad was even like, you know, he asked me all sorts of questions. I was perfectly honest with him, like 100% honest. And he's like, would you do it again? And I was like, and I told him like kind of the good, the bad, the ugly on some things. And I was like, absolutely.
Same here.
And he was like, and this is what he said to me. He's like, I used to think that this was like, you know, cool. until now that like my own kid wants to do it. And I basically was like, listen, man, like you have two options then. You either are going to like get on board and your son's going to be like, my dad supported me in this effort.
Yep.
Or you can be like every other naysayer and the kid's never going to forgive you for it, however it goes, right? But this kid would send me these unbelievable emails almost weekly when he was in Buds.
Did he make it?
Well, he did not. But my friends and I were all actually like rooting for, because it was like a really intelligent guy going through Buds and then sending you this like really intelligent write-up about like what was going on, and his insights on like, you know, instructor so-and-so may seem like he has like something wrong with him and may need to be like, you know, and then you know, it even like right before like right, you know, we were like, he would, you know, he just would shoot me a note and I'd be like, all right, well, you know, good luck. I wouldn't worry about that, but just like hang in there or whatever.
P.S. Don't quit, pussy.
P.S. Don't quit, pussy. And then, you know, so he starts Hell Week or whatever, and Hell Week ends, and I'm like, I'm at least going to get some sort of comms on like, you know, because I'd spent a fair amount of time, you know, and my buddy was the XO at Buzz at the time, so I called him up on Monday, and I'm like, hey, did this kid make it? And he sends me a picture of his helmet. He's like, I was like, how long did he goes, well, here's the second helmet there. He's like, he literally made it like 10 minutes. And again, not that I have any, and I would never discourage anybody, but all I would encourage you is if you're going to do it, you better be prepared to do it. And if it's something you're like,
if you think it's going to look good on a resume or help you drop some panties at a bar, both of those are accurate, but it's not the reason for you to do that. In the moment when you're in fucking extreme pain, none of that shit's going to matter.
There's not a single job other than wanting to be a SEAL, actual doing that job overseas that will keep you in the game. And that's what I tell people. Do you want to do this to like see how you're going to do, or do you want to do this like as a job, as a career, as a profession? And if that is the answer, then you know the answer. But man, and I would just rather somebody make an informed decision, because I think if you make an informed decision before, and I remember that like for me, my brother had this buddy who was like, he had been through Buzz, he was a SEAL. And I remember he was like one of the first guys that I talked to who actually, you know, had been through there, done the job, whatever. And I remember saying to him, just like kind of asking him some questions and stuff. And at the end, he was just like, hey man, like this is a totally doable thing, by the way. Like get ready for it, be prepared, but like you can do this. And he's like, I did
People do it every day.
Every day. And this guy was like, you know, he reminded me of myself. Like he was like, yep, this is my background. This is kind of because even at the time I was like, wow, it must be, you know, and I think it's just that it is really like, I love that community. I love the people. I love the assholes. I love the, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just this great group of people that like will
monkeys with machine guns
who will like find, like, if you have like a thing that you're sensitive about,
you better hide it.
Or it's not, or once it gets discovered, like it's not even going to be a thing anymore, because it will just be like ruthlessly, which is great though, right? In life, because I think there's too much of that now where like everybody gets so like offended about every little thing. Where like, it's pretty hard to offend. And even now, like today, I'm like, you know, somebody can tell me like, hey, you're doing a pretty terrible job at this. And I'm like, hey, I appreciate you telling me that, because the background there is more like we were saying, like nobody's walking around telling you like, hey, what a great job you did. It's like, these are the 10 things you could have done better, even at the highest levels. Right. And I think that's an awesome thing.
I can't think of a single day in my nearly 17 years in the SEAL community where somebody sat me down. They're like, listen, Andy, we've pulled you aside today because we want to compliment you on what you've done recently, ever. And you did this well. They're just like, fuck you and fuck everything about you. You need to do this better. And they're like, okay, thank you. I will do those things.
You know, but it's a funny thing, right? Because you almost get to the point where like you can almost start like self-critiquing. And you're never like sitting there going like, what a great job I just did. You're like, man.
Let me ask you this. Are you your own hardest critic?
Oh,
dude, the standards that I set for myself, it's probably actually unhealthy, because I end up letting myself down due to my own self-imposed standard
Yes.
that I don't tell anybody else about.
Yeah.
And then I have morning conversations at the mirror. It's like, what's up, you piece of shit?
Yeah.
You going to fuck up again today?
Yeah.
You're going to come in right underneath the bar?
Yeah, and it's like one of those deals, right? Where like you don't think about, like you don't think about like all the fish you caught, right? You're like,
Yeah.
that one that I missed.
Yeah.
Because I was so slow and I can't pay attention, and I think, and no, absolutely, but I think you get to that point where like that self-critique where like if you do something that's like, dangerous to somebody else and you're the only one who sees it or knows it, and you probably have a million stories too, but I remember like some people telling some like pretty brave stories or things about themselves where they're like, hey man, when you walked in front of me, I swept the back of your head, full fire, finger on the trigger, my bad. And like it wasn't to like
My bad.
scare the, you're like, oh
No, they're
great.
being honest.
But it also was for like the newer people to go like, that's not cool. And it also makes this like open conversation, which I think is like a very hard thing when you're used to that.
Yeah.
And then you go into like different civilian jobs and things where the more the standard is to hide any mistake you've made versus like own up to it
Yeah.
for the betterment of the team and the group. And I even deal with like some of that today where I'm like, listen, like I don't mind if you mess something up. As long as you learn from it, but I'd also like you to like tell everybody else like why that thing happened.
Yeah.
So that like they don't repeat it, right?
Learning point for everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you just don't see that, but you see that in those communities. And I think it's one of like the best, like, and it's tough, right? Because but it kind of makes you who you are, right? It's like, hey, if I'm going to start this new thing or if I'm going to go for this, like you almost have to have that like point of obsession where you never do sit there and go like, well, I nailed it today. Like there might have a moment, but then you'll have like 10 where you're driving home. You're like, man, I totally could have done that better.
I start getting uncomfortable even when I will find like micro success because I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Or I know, I'm like, okay, that went really well today, but I bet you there was an essence of luck that was outside of my control. So what I need to do is work 4 times harder.
Yes.
Because luck can't be a factor. And it's the pipeline and the community, I think, can create some amazing characteristics and traits for human beings.
Yep.
I know, and I'm sure you do too, some of the guys who just took the philosophies and principles of that community, which are not in and of themselves very high speed. But if you actually live them every day and they're reinforced every day, both in doctrine and in action, you go to the outside world, outside of that community, and I look at some of these guys, I'm like, you are actually fucking unstoppable.
Yep.
But I've also seen that hypercritical, and when I say this, I'm talking about I've seen it in myself, and it's something that I'm trying to find a better medium of, that I'm not joking when I say I'm my own worst enemy, like my own toughest critic. And it can go too far because holy shit, I don't want to end on my deathbed having those same conversations in the mirror like, you fucking sucked this life. Hope you can do it better next time, pussy.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
no, totally.
And so it's dangerous. And I keep telling myself, like, find a place where you can give yourself a little bit of grace. You don't have to sit there and, like, I'm never going to have my house with fucking pictures of me all over the wall.
Yep.
Like, that's too far.
Yep.
But also, you know what? Every once in a while, it's okay to, like, take a breather, take a break, and be okay with where you are.
Totally. It's almost like if you were given like a buddy advice and that buddy was you, like you'd probably be like, hey man,
Take a wrap off.
You're doing all right. Like but because then like, I don't know about you, but like when you start like feeling like that, like what's the only way to combat it then?
You have to work harder or talk shit to yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to, and my brain is like, I just got to do this more. And then all of a sudden,
like it's going good now, but it's about to get fucked up.
Yep. And I know that like, and I'm also one of those people, like if it doesn't go my way, I'm like, I'm not somebody who's like, well, it would have, but that guy screwed me. I'm like, nope, you didn't do something.
Oh, correct. Yeah, 100%.
To like make that happen, right? Even if you feel like you're like, I don't think I could have done it, but then it becomes challenging, right? And I know this because like I can be like really challenging to be around to other people who like don't think that, and I include like my wife, my family, and other people, and they're just like, dude, can you just chill out for a minute? And I'm like, I can't.
So let me guess. People would probably tell you that you're extremely intense.
Yes.
I've gotten that for the vast majority of my life as well. My dad, and I'm sure my mom would say it if she was still alive too, I think that was how I was described as a kid. So I think I had a little bit of an essence of that before going into that community.
Sure.
But holy shit, it refined that as well.
Yep.
And I can focus on things to the exclusion of everything else. Like,
Yep.
I love learning. I'm fascinated by the learning process. I like trying to figure out the small nuances and whatever it may be, whether it's skydiving or shooting or jiu-jitsu or fill in the blank. But at the same time, I turned 44 on Saturday. It's like, at some point, I need to get to a place where I can also celebrate the victories as well.
Sure. No, completely. And see, and it's funny because like I probably was not described as like super intense as a kid. If it was an area outside of like my stuff, like I started archery hunting when I was probably, I don't know, like 10 years old. And I don't know why. Like my immediate family doesn't
Because
hunt.
it's awesome.
It is awesome. And but like I had a family friend who like probably one of the nicest things anybody's ever done for me was this. Like I had a family friend who one of the best archery hunters like I've ever met. And like he took interest in my interest. And I remember like I used to have, you know, I don't even know why I thought it was cool. I just did. And I was like so intense about I would shoot that bow like every single day. I would, you know, sometimes I would like make my mom drive me hours to go get my hunter's safety card so I could go and start, and they would have me come up and like I would go hunting with him and his kids. And that's like basically how I learned how to hunt. But like if somebody saw me as a kid like in that, you know, but if they like put me in school in something I wasn't interested in.
Yeah. Oh, I was the same way. If I had no interest, I'm like kicking rocks and counting butterflies.
Completely. And people were like, this guy's never going to go anywhere and do anything. But now,
you
like,
just got to point him in the right direction.
Completely. And the for me, like the SEAL teams, like really helped, like foster and direct that focus.
Yeah.
So now, like, if I meet people, like sometimes, like people say to my wife, like they'll be like, "Man, must be tired out with this guy around all the time." And I'm like, "Yeah, she probably is tired because." You know, it's not an easy personality sometimes to be around, especially when you're in that process. Like, I imagine when you were learning, you know, like to get to the level that you did with your, you know, your, what do you call it? Wingsuiting, skydiving? What do you, like, what's the right word?
Both. They're both correct, yeah.
But I mean, to get to that level, right? Like, there's no room for anything but like full commitment.
There's not a lot of room for fuckery.
Yes. And so, like, to actually be safe in it, you have to be to like that level. But I'm sure there was times where I'm sure there was challenging relationships and there's people that were like, dude, like how much time are you going to spend doing this? But in my opinion, you're like mitigating risk, right? By being like super good at it. And that could apply to business too. So if I'm like starting a new business and I'm like half-heartedly doing it, like there's a huge risk of failure, which could have like a negative impact, and on everybody understands that, right? But like if you're fully committed to like the things that you're doing, you're kind of in my opinion, I guess you're like kind of securing because the only thing I've ever known is like, I don't consider myself to be like talented really at anything, but I am talented at like the pursuit of getting good, and I will just keep doing it. And like, I will just keep working at it, and eventually I'll get pretty decent at it.
That's a very common characteristic, I would say, of that SEAL community.
I agree. Yeah. You have guys who just like will literally dry fire and
they'll grind it out. Yeah.
Exactly. And in the first day you saw them, they're like, you know, they can't do anything, right? But I think that trait alone, if there was one thing like I try to like tell my kids, is like it doesn't matter where you start, right? Like everybody comes in, starts, like there's no worse feeling than when you walk into that platoon space the first day as an actual SEAL and you're in all new gear and all like the old guys are there and their stuff's dirty and bloody and dirt, you know, and you're like, you're like, man, I want to get going because I'm just standing out right now. And
you still have tags on your shit.
Completely, right? But like that moment though of like wanting to get after it and get started. And I think that carries over into like a lot of other things where you also have the balls though to like put on the new gear and walk in there and be like, hey, I'm ready to learn. I'm ready to go. And like, if I'm going to look like that guy, like I better like figure out how to do it and do it really well. And I think that attribute is probably like, if I could pick one thing from the SEAL teams that I absolutely like am so grateful for that whole experience, but it's number one, the ability to not be like overly affected by failure. And number two is just understanding the fact that if you have kind of like a new guy mindset on learning, you literally can like, I don't care. And you watch guys like they can pick new things. And I'm somebody who like, I have no problem pivoting from like, oh, fly fishing guide. Oh, I want to be a Navy SEAL. Now I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to, and there's people that are like, oh, you've done like a lot of different things. And I'm like, yes, but I did all those things, to my opinion, to like as high of level as I could take them, or like kind of the highest I could take them. And I chose, when things were going well, to do something different. It wasn't like I was like, oh, I was doing this and then I got fired and then I had to do this. It
was on your terms.
Completely. And like, you know, and I think I'm somebody though that like, I'm not a good bored person. And I have only had one job in my life that I would consider to be like fairly boring. And it was right after I got out of the Navy, which I think is like the worst time to be bored, because I don't know how your, you know, transition was, but like for me, you know, you spend all this time, there's no time to like deal with or process like a lot of the stuff you've done, right? And like high stress and losing friends and like different things. And like the analogy I would even use is like when you're doing CQC, if I'm in front of you and I go through the door and I get shot, like what do you do?
Shoot the person that shot you.
But you might step right on my head as you're doing it, right?
Yeah, you're going to do whatever I'm supposed to do. If you went left, I'm going to go right.
Exactly. So like you're going right in and you're not even letting like that moment phase you. And that could be like a guy that you're like, if I never saw that guy again, like no big deal. Or you could be like, that is my like lifetime best friend. But the point being is that the action of moving forward and being busy stops you from like having to like deal with that at the moment, right? And then obviously like you secure the room, the building, whatever, and then you tend to that person. But there's a moment where you just have to action what's happening. And I know for me, like when I first got out, I never like had slowed down, right? So, man, and then I was like sitting in front of a computer, and all of a sudden, like some of that stuff that I hadn't really dealt with, you know, starts. And now you're working with people who like don't understand that stuff. My opinion was like, you know, I wasn't going to go to somebody that I didn't feel like kind of like deserved an explanation.
Yeah.
And it just makes that, and I was one of those people that was like, oh, I've like done this, I want to get out, you know, this is going to be, you know, no big deal, you know, and then you start like getting into that process, and it is hard and it's challenging. And, you know, but one of the things that I really, you know, kind of learned and appreciated, like, as I was doing that, is you almost have to get out of that mindset that once you get out, that like, if you're not in the right thing, you can change it, and it's not quitting, right? It's just like pivoting. But it took me, I didn't want to quit because I was like, well, like
it's ingrained in us that is the single worst thing you could possibly do.
And it's like,
which is a double-edged sword, because you can take shit too far.
Complete. And it's a no comeback thing where we come from, right? Like you quit, there's no like, oh, I'll restart buds on Monday. Like you're done, right? Yeah,
you're done.
And relationships are done. And it's a good, I'm not advocating anybody quitting, right? But if you're into like something that isn't the right fit for you, and I wouldn't just like go like, oh, you should go and just like change it, right? But you can start making incremental changes to do the other things that may be better. And, you know, that's kind of what it like took for me. But it was, you know, you have those moments where like you're like bored, and then you're kind of like, you know, again, I don't like that feeling. And I probably don't like it because like that's what happens, right? But it's also those moments too where you can be like, hey, this might not be the right thing. I'm going to kind of like pivot in this direction.
You got to make the decisions for the right reasons.
Yep.
You talked about something that I think is important to highlight. You know, those moments where people, you know, how often was it briefed to us? Self-aid, buddy aid, corpsman aid, right?
Yep.
None of that is going to come at the exclusion of winning the gunfight.
Yep. Or
clearing the room, or going and executing whatever job it may be in front of you. And the more I've thought about this as I've been out of the military now, I've been out for shit. When did I get out? 2013, so 8 years, almost 9. Those situations where you need to make those decisions, say, to use the example that you provided, somebody goes down in front of you, they may be your best friend, it could be your mortal enemy, fill in the blank. It's a package, right? And because you don't do anything with it at that time and you focus on just doing your job, it gets wrapped up and it gets put in the storage locker.
Yep.
I think what people don't realize is that you have to deal with that package at some point. It's not just going to go away because you didn't deal with it in the moment. And those packages, to speak broadly, for me, I had to put a lot of time into unpacking those fucking things.
And like unwrapping them, right?
Because they have a lot of weight. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, for a long time, I would wake up feeling tired.
Yep.
I felt for like a year and a half, I thought I had ulcers. I it seemed almost as if it was impossible to achieve happiness. And there was some relationship stuff going on at the time with my ex-wife, which was not her fault. I'll put it all on my plate and say what was going on was definitely my fault. But if you don't take the time to unwrap that fucker, it's going to come tumbling off the shelf at the least opportune moment. So the advice I would give to people is be proactive.
Yep. Yeah, and a lot of people they do have things out there, right, that help you be proactive or do it in a way too that maybe I remember I kept having this I wasn't asleep, so it was like a recurring like day nightmare, right? But when I would be sitting there not feeling like overly productive or not feeling like I was like kind of working to my full potential, and I was like bored, and I had this vision of this buddy of mine who died, who would if he walked in, what would he think, right? And his time was out. And I did not feel like I've learned myself, I'm a big time guy. If my time doesn't feel like it's being spent 100% productive to in a place in the world, I don't like it, and
I've actually been thinking about that topic a lot recently, and I don't know why. And it started off with thinking about things. Yeah. People make a big deal about things, to include myself at some point in time in my life. I've wasted a fucking lot of money on stupid things.
Sure.
That I thought would be cool or provide happiness. It doesn't. Spoiler alert for people. I mean, you can have a little bit of happiness when you get something new, but it's going to fade. But I don't know of anything that can't be repaired or replaced or get insurance on it. The one thing that you can't do any of that shit with is time.
Yep. Yeah, and the time on this planet, right, is finite. And you and I both probably have friends, right, that were at their primes and
or even before it. Yeah,
they didn't know that was like the length of time that they had, right? And so I'm somebody that I'm I want to wring this thing out till there's nothing left, and I want to maximize, every second I have in ways that I find value, and that often doesn't, for me, I'm not a money-driven person. I'm an experience, purpose, time-driven person. But it took me, and I've made money and I've lost money, and I've I've had things where people are like, well, how could you, and I'm because the way that I'm getting it doesn't work well for me. And I just kept having this vision of how disappointed he was the greatest guy in the world, and he was such a big personality. I was if he walked in here right now, how disappointed would he be in how I'm using the finite time that I have, right? And to the point, I actually, this is kind of crazy, but it's true. This friend of mine was I was having some physical things too, just weird things that and I was man, what? And I said to this buddy of mine one time, I was man, I don't know what is going on. And he's like, oh, you should go talk to this gal. And she's part kind of therapist, but she does acupuncture and all this stuff, but she kind of talks to you about it before she just starts putting needles in. And I remember saying to her, I was I felt what's the movie where where the guy gets he's hates his job. It's a Mike Judge movie. I can't think of the they hypnotize him and he doesn't wake up, and then he just is doesn't go.
The Yes Man or something like that.
He doesn't go to work anymore. I can't think of the movie.
Office Space?
Yes, Office Space. So I literally go in there and I say to this woman, I'm listen, I'm having these things going on. I need you to dart me up with these.
You need to Office Space me?
You need to Office Space me. And I was I'm driving everybody nuts, to include myself. And I was telling her about this, and she was did you ever think that your buddy would be proud of you if he came in and saw that you'd gotten out of the Navy and you'd change these things? And I was no.
Fuck you and your objective
Exactly.
opinion.
I was no, I never thought that. And I was because they wouldn't be proud of me, and I'm not proud of myself. And I was so get those needles out and get, but her take on it, right? Back to the advice you'd give a buddy versus yourself. I actually got in my truck afterwards, and maybe it was the acupuncture, I don't know. But I thought about that comment, and I was and I started looking at it just a little bit differently, but I was
and that's the double-edged sword.
Yep.
I think of how it can be taken too far. It takes somebody outside of the world that we came from to be hey man, have you thought about it like this?
Yep.
And you go, no, because I was never taught to.
Yeah. And she had such a great point. And then I started thinking about it okay, so if that is how I'm feeling, then what am I doing about it? Am I just going to if I'm not changing it, then I'm okay with it, right? And I can't really complain then. And then from that, not just that moment, but just kind of like, but it was a different thought on kind of that experience. And I would totally like the advice I try to give people that are getting out. I'm like, if you can do it financially, I'd take, if you can take a month off, if you can take 3 months off, give yourself like that moment. Like I got out of the Navy, I was on terminal leave. I literally like went on terminal leave on a Friday and I started working on Monday.
Yeah, that's rough.
And I wish I'd give it. And I remember like my brother was a Air Force special operations officer. And I remember saying to him like, dude, take a break. Like give yourself like a quick pat on the back. Like you accomplished some goal that, I mean, how old were you when you wanted to be a SEAL?
11.
Okay. So 11 and you went through at what age?
18.
And then you did almost 20 years, right?
Yep.
So like, it's almost like if you add all that together, it's almost like a 30-year process that ends one day and you don't even give yourself a moment to be like, hey man, I did it. That was a dream.
The only thought in your head is, what's next, pussy?
What's next, pussy? And you better get started because you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden,
so fucking dangerous.
It almost like, it is dangerous, but it's like, but it's also good because it's like a driving whip that once you do start something else.
It allows you to accomplish things that will make others scratch their head.
Yep.
And they think that there's magic to it. And maybe there is. Maybe the magic is in those principles, but there's the combination of knowing the principle and living the principle. I don't know. It's not rocket surgery, but it's not fucking easy either.
No, it's not easy. And it's also not easy. It's not easy also sometimes being that person, right? Like it's like, and this isn't like but like, sometimes it's hard being like, I wish there's people I see and I'm like, man, I wish I could be like that guy just for a day. Like, I feel like it's almost like a drug. Like, I'm like, you think I don't want to take a break from myself at some point? Cause I do. Like, and there's no way to do it other than like feeling like I get my break when I'm like, okay, I'm so tired. Like I'm going to get a great night's sleep. There's nothing that's because I'm exhausted. Right. But like, I look at people that aren't like that. And I'm like, man, if there was like a pill for like one day where I could just get a break and have like no, like, but then again, like, that's probably not the guy that's going to make it through those things. That's probably not the guy that's going to like start doing new things and really, because my biggest thing, and I still feel this way, is like, I did not want to be one of those guys that like the SEAL thing was like my top rung on the ladder.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be like one of the steps that is a big step, right? But like, I wanted there to be other things and I wanted to like use that experience. And I feel like that's kind of what I'm able to do now with it. Where you're using kind of all of those things, but it can make you like a real hard son of a bitch to be around because when you get that focused, but that's what it takes. In my opinion, the only way I've ever found success is being that committed and that obsessed to like what the objective was. And and again, like it's shitty because, there's people out there that are like, they'll be like talking about like, oh, you need to balance everything. And I get that. Like I totally do. And I say it, but I don't do it. And
it's another thing that you have to learn. It's a different application. And I think in the end, you'll live a longer, more fulfilled life if you can find that balance.
Yeah.
And I say that as somebody who's struggling to find that balance himself.
And I think it's like one of those things, right? And that's where it's like good. You like talk to buddies and like, and you do need to like figure that out. But I also am a big believer that there's like the right time for that. Like, and that's probably not if you're starting something new.
Yeah.
That's probably not if you're like training to do this or you're like, there's a time that it's appropriate to like, to action the balance, I guess. And if you never give yourself, like, if you just move from those things, like it could be hard, but it's a hard thing to do. But I also think that's all the people I know that I would consider to be like successful kind of like in multiple areas and people I kind of look up to are people that they're like, this is the task. This is how I'm going to get there.
Yeah. And
they really do it,
Why'd you decide to get out?
So I was kind of at a point, I was right at that like 10-year point. We just had our third kid. I was looking at, kind of what I wanted to do. I really only had one thing I wanted to do, which I wanted to be at Damneck.
Yeah.
I got to do some augments, and that was the only place that I wanted to work. And I didn't get the opportunity to do that. And they basically the door was kind of closed. I had open the doors on my own. And the command that I was at the time basically was like, nope, like it's not going to happen. And I was like, well, that's, and I kind of felt like I'd done, like the needs of the Navy. And I felt like it was like they were either going to kind of work with me on my career aspirations and goals, and they weren't. And when that wasn't an option, I basically was like, hey, I'm going to start exploring, and I'm really glad now. Like I had some buddies out hunting a couple weeks ago that were guys that had that opportunity and did it. But like my thing was like I wanted to play at the highest level. Yeah. And I was like, I was just looking at it, I was like, well, if that's off the table, then like again, it kind of comes back to the time piece for me where I was like, I didn't have another like, I guess like big career goal at that time. And it was a hard enough pill to swallow where I knew that door was shut and like locked. Cause I was 30 at the time. I was 35 and I just knew career wise where I was at, the guys that were taking my age. And I was like, if I don't do this right now, this is the chance. And when that door like got padlocked, I was kind of just like, yeah. And it wasn't right. It was just, how it is. It's like some people, if you're dealing with folks that like don't put a high priority on that as a goal, then it's very hard to like convince them of why. And then you're at the end of the day, I mean, you're also sometimes dealing with folks that like that wasn't on their list. So they're like, well, why would I facilitate that for somebody else? Because they just don't think it matters that much. Yeah.
How the hell did you land doing what you're doing now? You might as well explain to people what the hell you're up to.
Sure.
Slightly unique endeavor.
Yeah, it's So I'll tell you. So so now my buddy and I basically started a cattle ranch in central Montana.
Where did the idea for this come from?
I'll tell you. So we started like literally like it's been a year. October 6th was like when we like got it all like going and closed on everything and so the idea came from two places. Number one, when I was working where I was, and I was inside way more than I'd ever been, and a good friend of mine who actually happened to be roommates with a SEAL team buddy, they run a big ranch kind of south of Helena, Montana, and I used to just go up there like on the weekends or whenever I had free time, and I basically was like, I just needed an outlet, like a physical.
When you moved back, to interrupt you, when you got out, did you move to Montana?
We did.
Okay.
Yeah. So we kind of our whole goal when we left Montana was like, I obviously wanted to be a SEAL, and then our goal was to move back here at some point. We didn't know when that date would be, but our goal was always to get back to Montana, Idaho-ish area. Montana was kind of the primary, and so we didn't know like. We knew where we were going, but we didn't know like what exactly we were going to be doing and how to make it work.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so 2017, we moved back to Montana, and so yeah, I would just go up there, and they were like super great, and another buddy of mine who was a SEAL and still does like a bunch of contracting and stuff, who's like very, he's just like protective of like the relationships he has, and he doesn't want to bring people that are gonna like, so like. It took a while for me to be like, hey man, like if you ever need another guy, and finally he was like, cause he'd brought like another guy up there and like it didn't go so great or whatever. And, so he was like, do not fuck this up. And I was like, yeah, no problem. So like, I remember though, like the first time I went up there, they were doing a bunch of stuff, and the ranch work can be like super physical, but it's very, very similar to like military stuff, to where you get a couple people all driving in the same direction. It almost becomes like very little talking. Everybody knows their job, and the jobs are hard, and there's like a element to it. So I started just going up there, and I had worked at some ranches and stuff before I was in the Navy, and I don't know, I always just liked that stuff.
When you say ranch work, what are we talking about?
So we're talking about cattle work, general. Like the first time I think I went up there, like they had a pile of calves, which are like, somewhere, let's like call it 150 to 250 pound, new calves that need to be branded and vaccinated and castrated and different things. And there's a variety of ways you can like accomplish that task. All of them have some sort of like physical component, because you have to somehow catch this. People think cows are like I had a buddy the other day that was up at the ranch, and he was like, I didn't know cows ran away from you. I'm like,
What did he think they did?
I have no idea. But he was under the impression that like these were like pets or something.
They like jump into your arms?
They're like basically wild. I mean, they're domesticated animals, but that doesn't mean they're like pets, right?
Doesn't mean you're bro.
Exactly. And these are like big, kicky, like, and so anyway, so there was 4 of us that day. My buddy, his dad, my SEAL team buddy, and me. And there was like a pile. I think there was about 500 calves that needed to be branded. And the way that we were doing those is each person had a position. His dad like basically ran the branding iron. And there's a lot of tradition in ranching where like you don't just show up day one and be like, here's the branding iron.
You earn that fucker.
You earn that thing. And usually it's like your place.
Okay.
If you're running, or you're like a top kind of guy, depending on the size of the operation. But anyway, the rest of us were, somebody would basically, you'd let like maybe, 50, 60 calves into a small pen. Like I would go over and grab one by hand, by the leg, pull it over to you. You'd basically would like clean and like jerk it to the ground. And there'd be a guy sitting on the ground that would then like hold its back leg, and you would basically like kind of calf jujitsu it down. And it really is like,
calf jitsu?
Yeah, you're like using like long bones and things, and there's definitely technique, and like you'll have to come up. It's a pretty good time. And these guys do not want to be held down, and they do not want to be branded, and
or have their balls cut off.
Exactly. And so,
do you guys just bite them off?
We don't bite them off, but there's a couple techniques that are not biting. And so we right at about the time where you're like, I don't think I can hold one more of these things down. And if you let go, like you're going to get kicked in the face, or your buddy is. So it's very much like that like military, like I don't want to let my buddy down because they're probably the one who's going to get smoked, not me. And so the minute you're like, the last one's done, you're like, oh, fuck, thank God. Like, I don't think I had one more of those in me. And then you go to the next position and you just rotate through. And I remember we got done that, and my buddy and his dad were like, hey, that was actually like super helpful. Like, thanks for coming out. And it kind of became one of those things where like I used to have to like ask like, hey, can I come out? And we kind of traded, like, I was like, you got to answer all my questions. and I was like, and I can have a lot of questions. And they were like, yeah. And so then I just started like going out there more. And this was over like a period of like a couple of years, and just started like learning stuff and getting a foundation and just really enjoying it. Like I don't know exactly why. It's extremely rewarding. There's like, you're caring for these things, but you kind of know like what the end result's going to be. And I was also like a huge hunter my whole life. And so, like during COVID and stuff, COVID wasn't that scary if you didn't like care what you wiped your ass with. And if you had like a meat freezer, you were like, I could probably make it through this, no problem. But like I had buddies who were like freaking out. They were like, we can't get food. Like we're going to the grocery store. And I just like, I always had like a big sense of pride, which I'm sure you do. Like when you go to your freezer, right, and you go to pull an elk steak out, like you almost remember like who was there.
Oh, every time.
Right. And there's a connection to that piece of food that you just don't get when you go to the grocery store. And so I was thinking about kind of like conceptually one day, just probably like driving home or something, like if you weren't somebody who hunted or didn't have that connection to your food, like I feel like you're missing out a little bit, right? Because there's something there. And even if like your buddy gave you something, like, and they told you the story, like you appreciate it more. And
well, you can see the difference in how people treat it as a meal.
Completely.
If you go to, let's be honest, the serving size at American restaurants is insane in comparison. Travel to Europe a little bit and be like, I'm sorry, is this the appetizer? Like, no, fucker, this is the amount of food you're supposed to eat. But there's no elk scraps that are swept into the garbage.
Exactly. And nobody's done, and like people appreciate the fact that you would even like use one of those pieces for them, right?
Yeah.
And what I love about it though is, you almost can relive the experience, whether like, and a lot of those experiences are tough, and like you finally got that shot, but you remember like how it happened, who was there. And so I started thinking about it like, man, it'd be neat for somebody that didn't do that to have that to like a certain level, right? And I think more and more consumers now actually do care about not only where their food comes from, but like who it comes from.
Yeah.
And so we basically started a beef company and a cattle ranch. And like my original like joke was like, yeah, like if you're eating tag soup, you can come to us and you can know that you're getting like a high quality, well cared for animal. And
you should explain tag soup.
Yeah. Tag soup is obviously like, so like if if I buy a elk tag and I spend, $800 or something in Montana, and then I come out here and I don't shoot anything, and I go home with my tag.
In your coolers that are full of Montana air.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you get to, jokingly put all your tags into your boiling pot of water, and that's all you'll be eating. And it really is.
The fucking struggle is real.
It's so real. And it's so, my buddies who just came out, like we had an awesome hunt and nobody like harvested anything, but the appreciation when it all comes together is so. Did you shoot one this year?
I hit him in the shoulder and watched him run off.
Gotcha. How far?
45.
Nice. But that, right? Like,
yeah, it's the worst.
It's the worst. And it's like, to get that one shot is so, everything has to come together, right? And then at that moment, like, you have to be perfect, and sometimes you are, and it's like unbelievable, and then sometimes you're not, and
you watch dinner for the next year run over the hill.
And so what we started doing was like thinking like, kind of along those lines, like if you had an idea of like the amount of time and effort that goes into like the thing that's now sitting on your plate, is that like, number one, you like might appreciate it more or learn more about like that process or that experience. And we've tried to be like extremely like open and transparent. Like, number one, we are like a startup ranch. I did not grow up ranching. We are first generation Montana ranchers, and like super proud of that. And that's not something like you see. And in the same way people told me, when you start telling people, right, it's pretty scary. You start telling people, I'm going to be a SEAL. I want to be a SEAL, right?
Sure you are, buddy.
And then what do they say to you?
Yeah, there's no way.
You're never going to make it. You know how many people quit? Why do you think you can do it? That type of. Well, it was funny with this, and to include some folks that like I thought were going to be more like supportive, were just like,
are you an idiot?
Exactly. And then there was other people though that were like, just like my brother's buddy, who was like, you can do it, and so I got to a point where like I felt like I'd like laid some tracks. I'd kind of like prepped the battle space. I felt like I didn't know, like, I didn't know anything, but I knew enough to like feel like I could get started. And I knew if I like focused on it and started like really, I felt like I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew enough that like I could probably figure it out. It might not be pretty, but I could like get after it and just with like hard work and practice. And so,
where does it start? Like, what's the first step? You have to buy the land?
Yeah, the first step was, was finding. So really, the first step was I was sitting with one of my like best friends and business partner, and him and his brother had just had like a really successful, basically exit from a business that they had started, and we're looking to reinvest in Montana, where it was a Montana company, and we were he was kind of talking, we were talking through like, hey, what do you, kind of what's your next thing going to look like? And I was kind of telling him, man, I've been doing this thing. And so I started doing like some like, I was trying to put these like leases together where like, if you own the ground, I could put cattle on it for a certain amount of time and I would pay you like a rent basically to do that. And then I would manage them. And so I was trying to get some of that stuff going. And then I was talking to these guys about it, and they're like, man, that's something that sounds like super interested. This was like right in COVID. So like all the food system in America stuff was starting to really show some serious cracks. And I was saying to them, I think it's like an interesting time. And, if you put something like this together, because number one, the amount of people in food production in what I'll call production agriculture is going down like hugely. And your average age of like if you just take like ranching, for instance, I believe is like 68. A lot of these people don't have like a succession plan for somebody to come in and basically continue running that business. Some people, it's a family thing and they've got kids that are still interested in doing that. Other kids are like, I'm never pounding another T-post in my life. Like, I went to law school. Like, I'm not coming back to do this. And their option, unfortunately, is like a lot of that is getting bought by recreational buyers. So those productive acres are actually coming out of the system, but the population of the planet and the country continues to go up. Food production continues to go down. And so as I was like looking at that, there's kind of a gap, and there's not a lot of people, because there is the kind of the mindset or the like, if you didn't grow up or this wasn't given to you, that it's not for you. And what I learned just through, the help of my friends was that it could be. If you dedicated to learning. And again, you came in and you were like, yep, I don't know what I'm doing. Show me the right way to do it. You know, I remember saying to those guys, don't let me look like a dickhead. Just if you see me doing some dickhead shit, I have very thick skin. Tell me and show me the right way to do it, right? And I've been at things too where like I was in the way and I was just screamed at and nobody said, you know, this is the right way to do it. You need to do this, right? And so yeah, the starting point is trying to find. So when these guys came on board and were like, hey, this is something we've like always like kicked around. We need somebody like if you're going to kind of spearhead this thing, we're like totally supportive and we want to partner on it. And we'd partnered on some other things, so it made like great sense. And they had been looking at a couple places. We started assessing those like seriously. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's finding the right properties that can support, you know, it's all a volumes game, right? So you have to have property that not only can support a certain number of livestock, but there's basically different properties. It's, if you take elk, for example, if you take, you know, like a super high desert type ranch or property, the number of elk that can support is far greater than a grass ranch or a mountain ranch. And the same thing with cattle. There's a very you almost have to figure out like what 1 acre can support.
The holding capacity, if you
will. Carrying capacity is what they would call it. And so that's based on feed, water, movement, pasture size, that sort of thing. So you almost have to find, you have to have a good idea of the place you're buying and what it could potentially do and if that's going to meet like your business model. And so, yeah, we found these 3 properties. We got kind of lucky because we started putting it out there. We were going to do this. Somebody that was in the area that we were looking at said, hey, this one place had been for sale. It's kind of off the market. The other one's definitely for sale and the other one's for sale. And if you could maybe get these 3 together again, they were, you know, at the time they had all been one.
Yeah.
So we were able to make that happen. And again, so it's like, it's an interesting business because there is a ton of business to it. Like just closing that real estate deal. Number one, there's like a ton of due diligence that goes into the water rights, the, you know, the property itself, mineral rights, and just the due diligence of, is this property going to meet the needs of like this business, right? And you go through that whole process and there's a lot to that. It takes months. And then we also had to close them in a way where it was 3 properties. So like if we didn't close that middle property first and something fell through on that, we would have, our whole plan
would have been shot. Yeah.
It completely shot. So we had to do it in a way where like, and these are like small communities, right? It's like the neighbors like kind of know, but maybe not. And you're trying to keep it to where, you know, you're just trying to get it closed, right? And so we had to close on that one a few hours before the other ones. And so there's just a lot of like strategy to that. And then once we got it closed.
And this is all before having a goddamn cow on the
property.
Not
a single one, because if you can't buy a single cow, because if you don't have the grass to put them on, what are you going to do with them? So there's like, it's almost like, it's very similar to military operations, to be honest. And I'll kind of explain more, but there's almost like phase lines that the minute you get to this phase line, it kicks something else off, right? Like if you go on like an E&E plan or something, it's kicking off multiple things. And once they get started, there's no like the train has left the station. So, but we couldn't load the train until, you know, it left the station. So we closed those properties on October 6th. We owned a ranch at that point. And then we had to start getting that thing stocked with the cattle. And a guy that I had met like through like a really good buddy of mine is a multi-generational Montana rancher. That is like what his family has done his entire life. That is like the only way that they make a living. He's also like one of the smartest people I know, like in the industry. He has like multiple like MBAs in agricultural production. And he's also just like a super good guy. And so I had been working with him a little bit when I was trying to put some of these leases together. And like one of those leases failed miserably. And I learned a lot though from it. Like I had to deal with a guy and like right at the end, but I had called in a lot of favors on the cattle side with this particular guy. So when this lease fell through, I was like, man, this guy's never going to take me seriously again. Like that was my chance. And luckily when I called him, I was like, hey, you know, this lease isn't going to work. And he was like, hey, no worries. You're like learning. That's part of the deal. And next time you'll get closer and I'll be here to help you when you do. So we got this place lined out. And then through his like guidance, mentorship, and like kind of like business partnership, now we were able to get the cattle that we ended up buying, which cattle are really funny because you could see a cow and there's very different like breeds and genetics, and I'll call it like it's like, you know, it's Golden Corral to like, you know, the Whole Foods are like the nicest steakhouse, and then there's everything in between. And as a beef producer, you know, you could be targeting, you know, a Whole Foods market, but if you're not like hitting those quality points, like, you know,
off to Golden Corral,
and the returns on those things are like very different in the time and effort you put in to, you know, really like high quality livestock. And again, that all starts with like kind of the genetics that you're using. And there's different programs out there that, you know, kind of verify how you're doing things. And there's just this like stair-stepped approach where like you could be shooting for everything going into more of like, let's call it like a more of like kind of natural Whole Foods like type program, which is a specific program at this point. But there's a lot of those for different food chains and things. And there's also distribution programs that, you know, set very high requirements of like what they take in, and then they would distribute out into like, you know, your kind of white tablecloth stuff. And then there's programs out there that distribute all the way down the chain.
Yeah.
But if you were to be producing, let's say you had something that got sick and needed like an antibiotic, and it disqualified it from that program, well, now you have to find like another, you know, space for that. And it doesn't just go all the way to the bottom, right? Because these are still like very high like genetic lines. Yeah. And so luckily, because Turk Stovall is the guy's name that I work with on all this, and Stovall Ranches, which is like south of Billings, Montana. And, you know, so we basically, because of him, like brought us to some tables that, you know, we really would, it was through his like basically lifetime of experience. And he helped us out by kind of helping us build our program kind of lockstep with them. And it's been really interesting though, because it went from, you know, him helping us kind of get started more as like a favor to more of like a business partnership, to where now, you know, we're doing more and more things with them together. Like we actually just brought like a bunch of their cattle up to our place, and we're like running those ones for them right now. He runs stuff for me, but it was kind of like a big vote of confidence because, you know, he was like, hey, can we take some of our stuff here? Like, it'd be like, hey, can you watch my dog for me? Yeah. You know, and there's people you're like, you know,
yes, and people are like, fuck no.
Yeah, and imagine you were gonna like sell that dog for a lot of money down the road, and like, you know, so we're making like really good progress. But yeah, so we started, we literally started this cattle ranch, and we started adopting like kind of like regenerative ranching practices that, you know, are, and we can go like way deep on this, but there's different grazing techniques that actually can like offset like carbon, because, you know, what makes plants stand up straight is actual carbon from the soil that goes into there. So you can actually like, you know, if you believe in it or not, you know, climate change, there's still carbon in the atmosphere, right? Yep. And the more of that you can like pull out. And so one of the best ways to do that was through like native grassland that used to, before like the invention of like barbed wire fences and things, would get these like kind of intensive grazing by like, you know, bison and elk and different things. And then predators would move those on, and then, you know, they'd come back at a different time, and it would give that grass time to like rejuvenate. Right. Mm-hmm. And so what we're doing is we're trying to use like super high quality animals, and we're also trying to use these like regenerative practices that not only are like good for the land and the environment, but in my opinion, they're also like very good for the animals. And so we kind of took like these two like overlapping like styles, because it's hard for ranchers, because, you know, just because you see like the cost of steak going up in the grocery store doesn't mean that that's trickling down to the people that are like producing it. It's stopping somewhere, and usually it's at these like different packing plants and things. And so it's hard for long-term traditional ranchers to change their kind of operational model, for the pure fact that if it doesn't work, that could be it. Like one bad year, some of these folks are like, I mean, they're one bad year away from like being done. And we were actually fortunate, probably like, you know, as an inexperienced kind of like new guy, it can be bad in a way because you're obviously inexperienced, but it can be good because you're too stupid to even realize like how bad or it is. But also I was able to like cherry pick all the good things from different operations that I like was fortunate to go and like work at, and take all of those and kind of compile. And I have nobody that's like, oh, if Grandpa Putnam saw you now, he'd be rolling over in his grave, you know?
Yeah.
I'm just like, hey, fuck it. We'll try this and we'll see if it works. And kind of our intent is that if we could do it on kind of like a mid-size or smaller scale, and we could kind of like prove the concept a little bit, that some of these like much larger operations could then be like, ooh, there's a model that's like actually working and maybe even working better. And if you put more grasslands into those sorts of like models, because, you know, production agriculture gets like a very bad rap. And even if you look right now at like fake meats and all these different things, you know, they try to play those off as like some sort of like environmentally friendly product. But anybody who knows anything about nutrition is that you should avoid highly processed foods, right? You don't get much more highly processed than what they're doing. The amount of water, fuel, acres that it takes to produce like one, you know, epic burger or whatever is actually detrimental to the environment, and it's detrimental to your health. And I'm like no expert on the topic, but that's pretty basic. I've worked with nutritionists and I'm now in this industry. And like, so they're kind of like, they're doing a very good job with their marketing, but in actuality, if you wanted to have a positive impact on your health and the environment, regenerative agriculture that uses beef cattle as the mechanism to like basically cut and regrow grass on a very large scale actually pulls more carbon out of the atmosphere than if you planted a bunch of trees, because it's like a continuous process. And then what's happening is a lot of that like biomatter is going back into, you know, kind of the dirt and becoming more like soil. So you're actually getting more growth, and like let's call it per acre, you're getting more of the good plants, less of the bad, and then you're turning those into like super high quality protein for human consumption. So anybody that's out there like, oh, I'm, you know, I do this, and like diet, as we're both fully aware, is like a huge part of performance.
Oh yeah.
I mean, what do you think it would be diet wise? Like, I'm sure there's times where you've like eaten really well and trained.
I mean, the fuel source, that, and I think rest.
Yep.
Those two things. But for me, diet can drastically impact my rest.
Yep.
All I need to do is load up on some very simple carbohydrates, like right before dinner or right before bed. I'm like sweating in bed. I'm itchy. Like, it can completely change a night's sleep. I'd say it's over 50%.
I would agree. And so like anybody who's like, well, I have this like great training plan, but I like eat like shit, you know, you're not going to
Good luck with that.
Exactly. Or like if you eat great, but you don't have any sort of like fitness in your life, like you got to have some sort of balance. And so what I found super interesting about this whole thing is that, number one, like you're, you know, like I said, back to like the military stuff, you feel like you're a very small piece of, you know, of helping solve some sort of problem. And you're like a very small cog in the wheel, but you're in the wheel, right? And just like in the military, like you're trying your best to you know, to do some like helpful things in the overall picture, like for the country. And I feel similar about this, where you like individually like aren't gonna, you know, win the war on your own, but if you had some small part in the solution to the problem, at least you're doing something.
How much time do you guys need for a proof of concept of that? Or is it kind of already proven and just most people aren't doing it?
So it is proven. Some people are doing it. I would say that, and again, this is just my like assessment of it, the people that are really focused on the regenerative side of agriculture basically use the cattle that they have as the mechanism to get the results from that. The people that are focused on really high quality end results are more in kind of like, I would call it a little bit more of that like industrial agriculture, production agriculture model. And there's not a lot of like overlap. Like you almost are kind of picking one or the other. So what we tried to do was buy super high quality cattle and then run them in this regenerative like way. And also using like low stress cattle techniques. And no different in my brain is like, if you shoot an elk very poorly, right, and it runs off and it spends all night dying,
it's all adrenalized and
yes, and like you
tastes like shit
completely, and you can notice that versus like super clean kill that they never even knew what happened, and yeah, it's Oh, I mean, by the way, one of the best archery kills I've ever had was a couple years ago, and I front shot this elk.
Oh, straight in between like the chest?
Yeah. If you ever get the chance to do it, it is the greatest archery shot I've ever. And I hit this thing, saw my fletching like go right on my pin. I just read this article about like where to shoot him, and he was 12 yards. I called him in, so he was like straight in on me. So I hit him, and he didn't even flinch. Like he was looking at these cows. He kind of just looked at me, but didn't even blink. Turned around, walked, made like a half circle, and I was like, man, I know I nailed him. Like, what is going on? Like, showed no signs of anything. I'm getting another arrow out. I draw back on him. He's at like 55 yards. And I just see, and this is maybe over like less than a minute. His ass just like starts shaking. He just like falls to the ground, totally dead, right? Like cows and bulls still in the meadow. And one of the greatest like tasting animals. Yeah. It had no idea. And back to that, like, you know, the care and the way that those animals get managed, I think over like the long term, it all kind of helps. And so what we have tried to do is kind of like marry those two circles and then kind of fill in that like middle area that, to my knowledge, like there's people doing it, but not like a ton. Like we're certainly not like inventing the wheel by any means. We're just kind of taking like different pieces of it and trying to like showcase with like the end result of hopefully being like, hey, if this is a model that actually works, then like much larger ranches that run like way more acreage and way more cattle would maybe have the business model to say. But I think it takes a little bit of time to really see the benefit. But I could show you pictures of like, you know, like a fence line where like one side does like regenerative modeling and the other does, you know, kind of like what I'll just call like more of a, you know, just kind of standard, like you turn them out and you leave them out and you pick them up on a certain date, versus where we almost move our stuff. It's almost like every 30 days. And that's all kind of dependent on the numbers and the sizes. But, and I think you would see not super long. I mean, we're already seeing some positive changes of parts of our ranch that were traditionally overgrazed are really starting to like come back and look a lot better. But I'd say over like that kind of 3 to 5 year period, you would see some really, really positive changes, to include being able to run more animals, which then equates to like more revenue in and, you know, more, you know, kind of high level production that you can be doing. So it's all kind of tied together. But, you know, just like the military, where, you know, you could have this like great plan, like, okay, we're going to gather all these cattle, we're going to get them together, and then we're going to move them, you know, 6 miles to the north or something. And you have this great plan, you brief your team, right? And like everybody knows their job and what they're going to do. And then the minute you step off, you know, environment gets a say, like the enemy used to get a say, right? The animals get a say, and your ability to flex like within the plan and recognize when things like you've lost the tactical advantage, and then like go, all right, hey, this is what we're doing now, and everybody to get on board and make that like quick shift. And that's where like things just continue to go well, or like, I mean, fall apart rapidly to the point where you're like, it's not going to happen today. And in being the person that's kind of in charge of that, I think like that, you know, that military like background, one of the best lessons I ever learned was an augment I was doing, and super seasoned guy, and like some stuff started going on, and he was just like, yep, we're done for today. And he was like, if we've lost the tactical advantage at all, if we're not coming back and it's like guaranteed win, like 10-on-1, we're not playing. And I remember, because you know how it is, like when you're a younger guy, like you'll put yourself and others into situations to want to be in the club. And I remember thinking like the lack of ego, but the size of, like, the guy's ego was so sound. Yeah. His tactical decision making was so sound that like he wasn't playing
so much pattern recognition too. Like he's just seen it play out so many times. Like, nope, not even a discussion. Like, we're done.
And that really stuck with me, and is probably something I use more than anything now, where I'm always looking for that pattern of like, oh, what happened last time when this went south, or, you know, and what happened last time, you know, where we were able to correct it, and what happened when we didn't, and kind of, you know, so it's a really interesting, it's a super interesting like deal, because there's this whole like it's very much like the military in that there's kind of a blue collar side and a white collar side, to where there's like the whole business modeling and the structuring and the business development, but then there's the doing. And it's also it's an industry where like, no different if you're like, everybody in the SEAL teams is expected to be a tactician regardless of like position, right?
Yeah.
So like if you're the OIC, nobody expects you, like, okay, you're still expected to perform and you're still expected to be there. And if in lieu of like some guy not being able to be there, you need to jump in.
Correct.
And so as like if you're like in a leadership position or a management type position, like you need to be able to like do these skills, and they're technical skills that if you haven't been doing them your whole life, it takes like a lot of practice and work, and they can be dangerous. And but it's a really interesting field because there's like just a super high level of like tactician like in that space.
Yeah. Just the subject matter expert.
Completely. And just even from like a care perspective, but then if you recognize a problem with something that like let's say something has a medical issue that needs treated, well, like even just getting that calf to like where you can treat it is a skill, right? And so it's been something that as I started doing, I just like, I don't know why, I really enjoy doing it. And I feel like there's like a lot of like purpose. You feel like you're like helping feed America, and you feel like you're like trying to produce like super high quality stuff that people that care about that kind of like performance piece are you know, hopefully getting. And it's hard. And, you know, it's something where, you know, yeah, it takes a lot of time and effort to be good at it. It consumes a lot of your time as you're like getting that thing like built and going. But at the end of the day, you feel like you're kind of doing something that brings some value. And
well, what's the veteran internship you have going as well?
Yep. So after doing this for a bit, I kind of recognized in myself, I was like, man, this is a great space for veterans, because you have guys that are like kind of used to it's definitely not like what I'd call like a clock job, right? It's a task job. So like there's a task that needs to be done, and when the task is done, we go home. But until that task is done, we're not going home. And that can also be a hard model to work under for some people that don't come from that background.
Yep.
And are new to that like agricultural space, right? So I just recognize so many like things, so many parallels from the military that worked really well for me. And talking to all these people who've been doing this for a long time, like trying to find just find good people in the space, like a lot of places now is super challenging. So you basically have a demographic of people that, you know, like I was talking about before, are kind of like going away or retiring. Some of those guys don't have a great, in gals, don't have like a great like succession plan. And you also have a ton of people getting out of the military that are like desperate for an opportunity, and an opportunity that's going to be a good fit for them. And so as we started doing this, you know, I don't know, saw an area where I kind of wanted to be like, man, I feel like I am really fortunate for the opportunity that I have, and kind of wanted to help like extend the table versus like building the fence, if you will. And so, yeah, we had a kid that like adamantly reached out to us, and I'd been thinking about this, but I hadn't like had time to like really solidify it. And he was going through a program where he's getting out. The military still like pays you to get experience. He's going to be going to MSU next year for like ranching systems. And we developed a relationship with them to basically bring some interns over in the summertime. Not that we should be like teaching anybody anything, but we'll get you in the game though. Like that's what I tell people. I'm like,
just wear a helmet.
I'm like, you might need a helmet, and you know, we'll tell you what we know, which is not
it's changing by the day.
Exactly. We're learning and changing, but you will get experience, and you will figure out at the end of the day if this is something that you think you should put like time and effort and money into, or you may figure out that like this is not for you. And so yeah, this kid reached out, super good kid, and he was like, hey, I've got this thing, and is there any chance you'd kind of help me come out? And we were like, yeah, absolutely. So I had to go through, you know, we had to get like basically registered and go through all the kind of bureaucratic process. So there was some work on our end. But once we did it, like we were kind of open to doing that. And it's something we're going to continue doing. Because again, it's a really great field. It has a lot of blue sky with like potential, in my opinion. And it's one of those fields where like if you like know how to work hard, you don't kind of let the environment, because again, it's one of those deals where like if the ops go, you're going.
Yeah.
It don't matter. And the same deal, like it's, it's fun to be a frogman on a Friday when it's sunny and warm in San Diego, but when you're doing that job for real, when you're getting in the STV, it fucking sucks. And sometimes like it doesn't have to be fun type of situation. And that's how a lot of this is. And I think it's a field, it was never presented to me. Like when you got out, like what kind of opportunities did people tell you should be looking at?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I didn't really talk to too many people about it. I was working part-time, or actually essentially full-time for CrossFit when I got out. So I had a job to transition to, but that job lasted for maybe 1.5 years after me leaving the military, and then I was done with it. And then I've kind of figured out my own path. I haven't solicited a lot, if any, really guidance professionally, especially getting out of the military. I'm kind of just chipping away at it myself.
Sure.
And what I will do is take advice from people who are successful in their field. This podcast, and it's not unique, what I'm about to say, because he has birthed probably thousands, it comes from Rogan saying, hey, you should start a podcast.
Yep.
I'm like, all right, you know what you're talking about.
Yep.
Perhaps I'll take a look at it. The public speaking that I do, I leave for Ohio. This episode will come out after I do the speech anyway. Yeah, I leave for Ohio tomorrow to do a speech, and that all came from a buddy of mine saying, hey, man, you should take a look at doing this. So it was more following suggestions than necessarily soliciting advice.
Kind of going through like the doors that like somebody might have said like, hey, like this door might be unlocked.
Take a peek in it.
Take a peek, right? Yeah. And if it's a good fit, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, this is like really great, right? But trying to help, because I remember like, it doesn't sound like you did it, but there's all these programs out there, right? When you're getting out. And,
I pursued none of them.
Okay. So, and I frankly didn't either, but I've been to some of those events, right? Where like you go to New York City and you're kind of there to like hang out and drink and tell good stories. And all these guys are like, yeah, this is awesome. Like, if you ever need anything, like, let me know. Right. And then like you call them and you're like, hey, I need a job. And they're like,
about that.
We don't actually have any jobs for somebody with your skill set. But next time you want to come into New York and drink, like, look me up. And you're like, okay, damn it. You know what I mean? And so there's not really a lot, in my opinion, like, there's not a lot there. And you have all these people that are truly desperate for an opportunity, right? Because like the first opportunity you have, like, is huge because it kind of gets you over. And if you already had that, right? But
it eased the transition for sure.
Sure.
There were still difficulties and complexities with it, though.
Completely. But like, I think a lot of guys, especially from like the backgrounds we come from, is you hear like, oh, you should look in finance or tech or contracting, right? Or you should, and you're like almost, I don't feel like, any of those are like maybe they're the right fit for somebody, but not for everybody. Especially guys getting out. Like if you go and you start working in finance and one of these like kind of like, and I know guys who have done this, like you started this like kind of this program that you're like coming up through, and it's great because you have an opportunity, right? But like talk about like being bored at a time where you're just getting out, you're working through some stuff. That's a challenging time. And then if you're not loving it and you're like living in the city and then now you're kind of like, man, like what does this become, right?
Yeah.
And I never once heard one person be like, what's like a huge industry that actually has like a ton of value and continues, in my opinion, to be like part of the security of this nation is agriculture. And
I certainly did not hear that a single time getting out.
Right. And like from like, you could have, I know guys that were like the business development or like operational guys at like John Deere, like huge job, right? From sales to like actually doing it to real estate to, there's so many avenues that I've learned, and what I wanted to start doing kind of with like my opportunity was try to like expand that opportunity to people, but with like a meaningful expansion where they either like, okay, now I'm going to college, I've done this for a little bit, I know what they're talking about, or hey, this is not for me, or they go, hey, this is like something I never considered before. And we just had a really big day at the ranch the other day where we like literally brought all of our cattle in. And then you basically sort the calves off of the cows, and those get like weaned, and then they get shipped out, right? But it's a huge day because like it's just a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot to it. But we had our intern, our actual guy, and then two of his buddies who were both Marine Corps guys that are in agricultural degrees at MSU who had never actually worked at a ranch before.
Huh.
And And instead of like yelling at them or like, you know, we walked them through the whole plan, gave them jobs where they were like fully participants, and then like corrected them along the way. And it was like, hey, remember when I told you to like, you know, back the trailer up right to the corner and there can't be a gap? And then how big's that gap? And they're like, oh, it's like 18 inches. What happened? Calf jumped out. Well, now what's happening? Oh, those two guys have to go catch it. How much time do you think that just added to the day? Probably 20, 30 minutes.
Don't do it again, pussy.
Don't do it again. Back up to the corner like I told you, right? And now this guy's doing it. And those guys left with like some level of experience of like, what is this? Even if it's not, you know, you're seeing all these people that are like trying to be good at it. And we were not perfect that day by any means, but it was cool from my opinion to like open them up to something which could actually be like a real opportunity in the future for them versus just like, here's this program. And yeah, you go through it as like you know, again, you know, and Mike was like hitting on this when he was on with you, like, you know, kind of the professional veteran, right? Like I'm a veteran. It's like, oh, okay. What does that mean? And trying to take guys that are veterans that were folks that, right, that like raise their hand to do a really hard job and protect this country and be part of that system. There's so many great people in there that are now like getting out and needing opportunities and just trying to be part, I guess, of that solution to a certain extent, because I know how that felt. I will be grateful forever to the first opportunity I got because I needed it so badly. And you know, when you probably, I don't know if you felt this way or not, but like when you were at CrossFit on that like first job, do you feel like you like stayed there the right amount of time, stayed too long because it was an opportunity that like at the time helped you out in a way to like progress?
I stayed too long because of only one thing, the money. And I didn't know if I was going to be able to figure out a way to replace it. And it was my own fault. You know, I put the handcuffs on myself.
Sure.
You know, the golden handcuffs they weren't put on me. I put them on myself. And then instead of seeking out other opportunities or looking for ways to off ramp or, you know, aggregate my activities and in the sum total recreate that, I stopped doing those things. And then I eventually felt very put into a corner about it. And then at that point, I basically just quit and started over. And since then, I'm much more diverse in the things that I do. And at this point, I actually don't pursue money. I pursue things that I enjoy, that I feel to be empowering and enriching, and that I feel, in some essence at least, is giving back. Trying to make the world a fucking better place a little bit.
Yeah,
you know,
to some extent, right? And again, like everybody always talks about, like, oh, like you know, like purpose and all these things, and I am in agreement with that too, but because I do gravitate towards those things where you feel like you have some purpose in making this like world, like you're leaving it better than you found it, right? And a lot of people aren't doing that anymore, you know. But like you have kids, I have kids, like I want this place and I want them to have like opportunities that I didn't have. So like a lot of the stuff, like I tell people this all the time, like I've gotten to the point in my life where I actually like don't really give a shit when anybody thinks about me personally or like what I'm doing. And, you know, anybody who thinks like, oh, this is silly, or they're waiting, the people that I feel like that are like waiting for me to fall on my face, I just don't give a shit.
Yeah.
But what I do give a shit about is like what they think about my kids and what they're going to think about like the capabilities of my kids, like especially in this space. Like I might be first generation, but they're going to be second generation, and they're going to have the option, if that's something they are like interested in and want to pursue or not, they're at least going to have the skill set and the option to look at it. And if it's something that they continue to pursue, I do care about the way that they're perceived far more than I care about. And I'm like, hey, I'll be like the first one through the door on this thing.
Yeah.
And I got no problem with like, with that. But I would have a huge problem if like, after that, somebody said like, oh, well, like you're only like second generation. It's like,
which is going to happen, by the way.
Completely. But it's like, do you know
the person who's been doing it for 4 seconds longer than you'd be like, whatever, new guy.
New guy. Yeah. But like, it's a good mindset though, right? Like you're always in it. So like my thing is like when I show up at Turks and his crew is like, this is what these folks have done their entire lives. And it's something that I have not done my entire life, but like want to be very good at. So like when I walk in down there, I'm like, hey, show me how you guys do this. Hey, oh my, that was really cool. Like and if you have that attitude, but if you came in there and we're just like, I know this, you know, and they kind of
be the perpetual new guy.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like a new guy mindset of just like, teach me, make me better. And they almost expect, like, if people hear you were a SEAL or something, they like almost like kind of expect you to come in and not be that way. And it's like super, like, I feel like just kind of like disarming if you're like, hey, will you run me through this once? Like, I haven't done this before.
Yeah.
Or
like ever.
Yeah. Hey, I've done this a few times. This is how I was taught. Could you show me like another way to do it? Right. And all of a sudden now, like, you're getting all this information that if like you'd put any walls up, you wouldn't have gotten. And, you know, I feel like that has been like, because, you know, that's not boring, right? Like if you're learning and you're doing different things and I'm totally in agreement with you. Like you'll never be great at something you don't really enjoy doing.
Yeah.
And you might be good at it and you might get some money, but you're never going to be the guy who's like, the people who are great get the big money. The guy who's good is like the middle manager who like gets paid and like kind of is like gets very much caught, in my opinion, in that like trap of like, now I've got the house and the mortgage and the cars and I've kind of got to stay here. But they're not the guy that's like really making the big money because like they're never going to be great at it if it's not something they're like truly committed to and really enjoy doing, you know? And it's kind of like one of those deals. Like if you don't feel like, if you're like, hey, I'd be here for free. And at one point I was, you'll probably end up in a pretty good spot.
I think so. Do you realize that we are complete idiots? We've talked for over 2 hours and haven't mentioned the name of your ranch.
No, that's pretty good. I told you after being stuck at that STP, I could talk. Yeah, so it's Little Belt Cattle Company.
Where'd that come from?
We're right up against the Little Belt Mountains.
I was going to say, it looks like you wear a little belt because you're a wee man.
That's right. And, you know, we like to see people keeping it tight and, you know, keeping their belts nice.
So it's not based off the leather belt. All right.
That's
fine.
right. No. So the Little Belt Mountains are actually like a really cool mountain range in Montana. Like on a map, they don't look like all that impressive. And then like you start getting in that terrain and surprises you big time. Like there's places I looked at even on our place and I was like, oh, that doesn't look too steep. And then you get up there and you're like, wow. And there's these like really cool, like just these big like canyon formations. And it's a really neat part of the state. It's super windy, but it's a really kind of like cool area. And it doesn't have like the like, you know, kind of those like huge mountain vistas, but like, you know, you can kind of see like the north end of the Crazies. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's a cool area. Yeah.
So Little Belt Cattle Company.
Yep.
If people are interested in your cows and what they taste like,
yes,
where can they find them?
So we are working right now on a couple things on that. So you can find us on Instagram. It's probably like the best place. Again, we're trying to be like super transparent and just let people kind of follow along. And, you know, we have some cool pictures on there. And then we've got some stuff of like, here's me stuck in the ditch with my 3 kids in a side-by-side, having to walk to go get a truck. And like my 3 kids are yelling at me.
#learning.
Exactly. And, you know, so if you want to kind of like, you know, check us out, follow us on that. That's a good way to kind of see just kind of like the daily, kind of weekly, monthly process of like what actual production in agriculture and ranching looks like. We have a website. That's www.littlebeltcattleco.com. And then for our meat, right now we basically are selling into 2 kind of like larger programs. One of them is called Certified Angus Beef, which is like one of the better Angus programs. And you'll see their stuff in different grocery stores and things. So we are like one of many suppliers into that. So wouldn't be like a, you know, specific, but it's a very, very high quality like program that sets pretty high parameters and has, you know, kind of production quality points that you need to meet. And then the other one we do is we do a Wagyu program for a program called Mishima Reserve, which you can go on there and like kind of buy all their stuff. We're going to eventually get to the point where we're doing more of like a direct to consumer model.
Yep.
So we're at this point, like right now, like we're, you know, it takes about 18 months to finish one of those calves. And
so you haven't even yet gotten to the point where
we haven't finished anything yet. We have our first crop of calves right now. And that's one of the things with like starting something new in this space is that like you don't have that immediate first year, you know, kind of on last year. So we've had to like struggle and kind of fight and find different ways to do different things and, you know, just kind of have some different like pillars of income of, you know, just to kind of keep us going. And, but yeah, so eventually we will get to the point where, and, you know, another topic, which, you know, the processing and things like that, we're trying to get that sorted here in Montana to where somebody could go on and buy either like, you know, like a quarter cow, half cow, but also like individual cuts. And the biggest holdback on that is the actual processing because getting spots, at processing plants is extremely challenging. And so that's why we almost had to, like, this year, especially as like a new business, to kind of, just make sure that we, or here next year, was to, produce for some of these larger, they handle the processing and the distribution and sales.
You became kind of part of their pipeline.
Exactly. Yep. We're producing for them, which is not a bad model. And they're, again, both great programs, but we would love to get to the point, here, kind of like next spring, early summer, to where, we're kind of like more of a branded beef line where people can come and buy from us specifically. But that's something that I think people don't realize, from kind of like a calf hitting your ground to like a steak hitting your plate, that time and care that goes into that.
Yeah.
It's long. And I certainly didn't have a full appreciation for it until, we started doing this.
It's a crazy, fascinating journey that you've been on. I dig it.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. I don't know if I ever considered for a second agriculture.
You should come out. Honestly, I told Trevor the same thing. Like,
Trevor will be out there just biting balls off calves.
He'll
go full native. Hashtag analog.
It was so funny. So, like, he's been hunting for a bit, but not like super long. And he comes out. He's like, yeah, I'm on an antelope hunt. I'm like, yeah, sweet. So like, we're out doing like ranch stuff, and you're just out there so much. You get like super in tune to like what everything's doing, not just the livestock, but the wildlife as well. So I'm out there, and I come back, and I'm like, hey, yeah, I just saw like a really nice buck and a bunch of antelope down here. And I'm like, yeah, if you like come here and the wind's probably going to blow like this, and you kind of like sneak up, you'll probably see him, and you might have a chance to get in on one. He's like, oh, sweet. So he takes off, and I mean, like 2 hours later, he comes
back with the buck.
Comes back with like a nice buck. And he texts me, he's like, I got him. I'm like, dude, like, well done. Like, I was super impressed. And it was great having him out there, and they hung out for a few days. But I told him, I was like, you guys should come check it out. And if it's something you haven't done before, number one, there's like all sorts of different ways to kind of like get involved. Where like, like I said, like the first time you might just be kind of like, all right, I'll check it out. And then somebody starts kind of showing you what to do. And yeah, you guys should definitely come out, though. It's like,
I'll take you up on it for sure.
Should.
Yeah, it's interesting to me.
It's super interesting, and it's super interesting to see, like, just kind of, even just on like, oh, like, hey, this is what has to happen kind of like today. And there's definitely there's like really big days like within that, like when you're doing those brandings and things, like it's a big long day that starts, at, this year I was up, a couple hours before it got light, because there's just always things I feel like that need done. And then, and you want it to go smoothly. And like, if you start creeping on the timeline, like all of a sudden it just,
never goes in your favor.
No, but that, that day we had like a great plan. We had a great team, and it was like pretty smooth. And then you feel like you're like, hey, like, that was pretty good. But the only reason it was good because I worked to get my like plan done and spent a lot of time doing it.
Yeah, it doesn't happen accidentally.
No, it's like anything, right? Like, and I tell people all the time, because, people will be like, well, like, it seems like you can like shift well, or like when you quit CrossFit and started doing other things. But like, you probably had explored at least a little bit, I would imagine, something, right? Or
I had, and there was a phase in that where I had to take every opportunity that presented itself.
Sure.
And as opposed to not pursuing money and only things that I wanted to do for a period of time until I was financially stable, I had to do the exact opposite. I had to take every fucking opportunity. And some of them I didn't enjoy, but it didn't matter because that's what I had to do.
And it builds into it, though, right? And that's what I want people to like, if anybody like looks at my stuff and goes like, oh, like this person like just like makes these like kind of like willy-nilly changes. It's like, it's not the case. Like, they're like well thought. It's just like, it's like, I'm going to go to Buds. I'm going to start training and running, swimming, and push-ups, right?
Yeah.
And you get to a baseline to where you can like do that well before you prepare yourself, like before you, right? Like if you're going to jump off the side of a building or whatever crazy shit you guys do, like you've like gone through that, right? And you've like, you know, like what the profile is that you're going to like attempt to, you're not just going up there like, oh, don't know how high this is. And
I mean, you could. I think the odds of you doing that repetitively
are very low.
Probably very low.
But it applies to life, right? Like your ability to jump into other things, like you going from like a successful career after the military, that process though, right, of like that transition is definitely like a process. Like there's ups and downs. It's not like a perfect thing, but it can get closer. The more you like identify what the center looks like for you, the closer you can get to hitting it, and like back to like Barklow as we kind of get but like he's another one who's like an awesome guy who like how many people you figure reach out to him and are like, I want to do something like what you're doing? Countless, right? But he always takes like the time to say like, and that doesn't mean that there's going to be like, he's not like, well, I can hire you here.
Yeah.
Right. But he's like, hey, this is how I got started. And sometimes getting started means like you're doing it for like less pay or you're doing something else in the meantime. That does not mean like you just get to go like, well, I'm not going to, you know, make sure that like my finances are in line, and I'm not going to just like make this like
you got to do all that shit
completely. But that gets you ready for when the door becomes open to walk through it. Right. And confidently walk through it, because like if you're prepared for buds and you know that that's the job you want to do, your chances of making it are extremely high.
Yeah.
If you want to tell chicks at the bar that you're a SEAL and you want to see if you can get through Hell Week because you want to like prove something to your dad.
Yeah. Probably not
a good idea.
Yeah. If you're just looking for a business card, find a different occupation.
There's probably easier ways to go about that, you know, but I think there's so many guys out there, and I think you're doing it, you know, with this, where like you're opening up opportunities for folks to like learn more about certain things, and, you know, and you're having like a more intelligent person come into those things, because if you know what you're getting into, I think you're far better suited. And that's really what we're, you know, my biggest thing is just trying to, you know, now that I've kind of developed an opportunity for myself, is try to continue that. And we're trying to do that now with like not just us, but other, you know, ranches that I think do like a really good job, and trying to help them get more veterans like into those pipelines for them.
Yeah.
With the understanding is like, hey, you're going to have to train this guy, but when you do, you could have an awesome person. And you know, it is like, sometimes it's easier to have somebody with a blank slate. If you're teaching somebody how to jump out of a plane, like, do you want somebody with like 15 jumps? Zero, right? And like, no bad habits.
Correct.
And especially if you want them, like they're going to jump with you. So like you're developing this person to be like a partner. You're going to make sure that they're trained in the right way. And I've talked to so many people that are like, I'd rather take a guy like that than hire somebody that's been doing it for a super long time, that comes in with a lot of, you know, bad habits, preconceived notions, negativity.
I don't want to unteach that stuff.
I don't either.
Yeah.
And so we're really hoping that we can open up more of these, and it's something that we've got off the ground now, and that felt really good too. And I think like the guy that's working with us is gaining a ton. Like he's getting a lot of experience, and you know, again, it's if there's a way you can help people, you know, if you're in a good spot and you can help somebody else, I feel like that at some weird way, you know, even if it doesn't, you know, probably comes back or
helps you sleep at night, man.
Helps you sleep at night. And, you know, when you're helping good people, and, you know, I know my whole life, you know, sometimes you didn't even notice it. It was small help sometimes, but it was help. And that's what we're trying to do. And we're trying to make like the highest quality beef protein we can here in Montana and for America, and, you know, kind of help be part of that solution still. And, it's been a interesting thing, and we're just getting started. And so, you know, you'll see, probably some stuff that I said today, like probably at some point be like, that didn't work at all. And like, some of it may work perfectly well. So, but definitely we'll figure out a time for you guys to come out, and, because again, it's super fun introducing people to it too. I know when I got introduced, I was like, wow, this is pretty cool.
I'm game, man. Let's, I know you got to drive ahead of you. Let's get you back on the road. That's 2.5 hours.
That was great.
Cool.
Thanks.
You.
Appreciate it.
On the west bank of the river. That's A firm, west bank. It gives me hell. Still give it to me in the grove. Okay, one's in from the north. I've got the west bank of the river. Two's going to give it to you in the grove. Roger, give me that gun run. Right along that bag, baby.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thanks for taking the time to tune in, whether you're listening on an audio-only platform or you're watching on YouTube. I appreciate that you take the time every week to tune in. People ask me a lot, what can they do to help me spread the word? And the answer is actually embedded in the question. The biggest thing you guys can do to help me, if you enjoy the podcast and you think it would be helpful to others, is subscribe and share it with other people. And if you have the time, go on to Apple Podcasts and leave me a rating and a review. If you think the podcast sucks, tell me it sucks and leave a 0-star review, or the lowest stars possible. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion, you can go to clearedhotpodcast.com, and there is a contact me button right there, which will land in my inbox. And the last thing, if people are interested in helping out, what you can do is fly the old flag. And by that, I don't mean an actual flag, because I don't have any of those. I'm talking about t-shirts or sweatshirts or hats, whatever it may be. Again, clearedhotpodcast.com. Click on the shop tab, and hopefully something in there looks like it would be an item you would like to wear around town. And then you could tell people what it is when they ask you. But that is it. The biggest thing I can say is thank you. I truly appreciate it. And until next time, see you.